い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り戻せたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうか願いが叶う街にそう時間楽しい年に行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会うやなものって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの神道だ我々の忘れおいでこれは愛の告白願って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり雨のアウハウと叫んで気合い入れよう恋の願うの今日の今日のベケーション今
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
We are here to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime this week on the show. We are bringing you an episode the world didn't want to happen because we're covering stuff that didn't exist when we originally started this season. This episode has survived Jonathan moving across states. This episode has survived now a multi-day power outage for me here in Texas. God wanted us to stop talking about Sound Euphonium, and word said, screw you. So we're here to finish up part 6 of our Kyoto Vacation, Yamada Naoko Strikes Back, or I Have No Voice and I Must Sound Euphonium. We'll be talking today about the most recent anime that KyoAni has made, which is the Sound Euphonium Ensemble Contest OVA, which sort of brought Sound Euphonium back, and then Season 3, which just finished airing like a couple of weeks ago.
Indeed. And Sean, you're not even remembering all the things that almost stopped this podcast because we have a special guest today, Mr. Thomas Lack. Say hi, Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
Okay, so that's Thomas. He's our, resident musician and brother to one of us, to me. And Thomas was going to be here because I'm in Colorado now with me on the same mic. And then what happened? You couldn't get here, and now you're joining us on Zoom, even though we live like 20 minutes away from each other.
Yeah, I was just running an errand, and on my way back to the highway, I couldn't get anywhere because they closed all the roads. So I got home like 10 minutes ago and frantically tried to set something up.
Yeah, so Thomas, thank you for being here. We all struggled to be here for the podcast, but nothing's going to stop us talking about Sound Euphonium one last time.
Yes, it does. This was the most hassle to get to recording a podcast I think we have ever had. There was a whole long of it, and it's amazing that the podcast is only going to be, 1 week late, Jonathan?
Yeah, only 1 week, because this was supposed to come out last Sunday. We had it all planned out. We were hitting that. It felt like we jumped out of a plane and we're hitting like a target on the ground. Because again, when we started recording the Sound Euphonium episodes, this season hadn't aired yet at all in any way.
No.
And then it was while we were recording those that the season started, and we were like, okay, I picked the right date to premiere it, and we were all ready, and we were going to hit that bullseye, and then just the world conspired, and it's going to be 1 week late. But that's not bad. That's not bad at all.
No, yeah. So we're here to finish up talking about Sound Euphonium. I'm excited about this podcast because this is the series, Jonathan, where we're in the ring. We've got our fucking boxing gloves on. We're going at it because I really like Sound Euphonium, and I really liked Season 3 of Sound Euphonium. Jonathan?
I didn't like Season 3 of Sound Euphonium. And here's the thing. I did like Seasons 1 and 2 of Sound Euphonium. I really liked Season 1. I really liked Season 2. I probably liked Season 2 a little bit less than Season 1, but I don't want anyone to like Thomas did, parody that into that I hated it. I liked those seasons. I think Liz and the Bluebird is a fucking masterpiece of a movie. I didn't really like the Sound Euphonium film, and I was looking forward to Season 3. I liked the OVA quite a bit. But here's the thing. Something about Seasons 1 and 2 are that I feel like even though there is, to me, some narrative repetition in that second season, there is also a real sense that the characters are growing and changing. And Season 3 as an ending, to me, feels like the opposite, with a lot of characters reverting to their Season 1 issues. The narrative is constantly retreading old ground. Characters like Reina and Taki really do not evolve as people. They are encased in amber. Assumptions about the way the band works, like the meritocracy system, are just never meaningfully challenged. Add to that this season mainly revolves around audition drama that is very similar to season 1, but extended to the majority of the season, and not just a few episodes. And I was pretty checked out by the time the finale rolls around, which I think is kind of astonishingly limp as a final episode for a series this ambitious. So I was excited at the beginning. There are some episodes I like. There are 2 episodes in particular I think are great, and I think not coincidentally, they're both directed by Yamamura Takuya, who I think steps up in a big way this season. But yeah, I was not a fan of this season. But Thomas, I guess you're the tiebreaker to tell us who was right.
My opinions are complex and ever-changing. Overall, I didn't like it as much as I wish I had. I was actually watching it as it aired. I think I caught up around episode 10, so I watched the last 4 episodes the day they came out, so it's been like a month for me. But when I was watching it, I was really enjoying it until episode 12, and the way that ended, I didn't really know how to feel about it, so I waited a week for the finale, and then I felt like it didn't actually resolve all the drama it had set up, and since then, the more I think about it, the less I like it overall. So as it sat with me, my opinion has worsened.
So for me, like, this might actually be my favorite, putting Liz and the Bluebird aside as a movie, that's kind of a different thing, but in terms of the main Sound Euphonium stuff, I think this is my favorite thing in Sound Euphonium, and I think it is partially something that has, like, I've noticed about the series and we've kind of talked about here and there, but this series captures something about, like, high school in a very particular way that even though anime is like 90% set in high school, most anime doesn't, like, look at high school and actually dramatize high school and what it is to be and exist in a high school. And there's something about this season of the cyclical nature of the story. And I see, Jonathan, that I think that has frustrated you a lot. For me, I found it very enriching because it's so true, it's so real, that, like, these same problems, these same issues, these same things come around every fucking year. And it's something they talk about in the show, that it's like stacking stones in the river Styx and it constantly gets swept away. And you're as a person, particularly as a teacher, you're in that mode, but even as a student you are, and you're growing bit by bit as that happens. And, I'm just a huge fan of Kumiko's character, and I think what they've done with her here, of having her confront a lot of the same issues that she confronted in her first year in seasons 1 and 2, but now being in such a different position as a person and having it challenge her very directly and challenge her growth as a person and where she is heading in life. I just found that, like, a very impactful story. And it mirrored things about my life also personally as someone who becomes a high school teacher, that I think it captured a reality that I don't think I've ever seen a story really explore. So I found it very impactful. Like, I was extremely moved by the last 2 episodes in particular and kind of the story they tell. But I also kind of recognize that there are certain things that the show is doing that is going to hit me in a way that for other people is probably not going to really affect them emotionally or anything like that.
It was funny. Thomas and I were texting about the show last night, and he asked me, what do you think Sean is going to think? And I said, Sean is going to love this to the moon and back. And I don't even really know why, but I just know he's going to. And I think I was correct on that. So, and I'm glad you love it. This is not a, Sean, you fucking idiot, why do you like sound? I'm not going to do that. That would be...
No, you guys are the people missing out on the beauty of season 3 of Sound Euphonium. I feel bad for you guys.
Okay.
Well, I do think it's interesting, Sean, that you said sort of as a teacher, you found that side of it relatable, because, like, in seasons 1 and 2, when I watched it for the first time, I wondered if it was hitting me differently because I was a band nerd and still am. And I think in season 3, then, that side of the drama for me fell really flat.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I was I wasn't a band nerd, I was an orchestra choir nerd. But I do think, like, one thing, and Thomas and I talked a lot about this, I do think the music side of the story this year is, like, notably worse. Like, I think they don't really know what they're doing with the actual music, and there's a lot of, like, gaps that feel like they don't really know what they're talking about, and we'll get to that later, but it is something I liked in the rest of the series that I felt like was really different this year.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest sort of struggle I think this season has, is how to do the music. Like there's notably less of the like big performances, and that's true of the OVA and of the season.
Yes.
It felt like a bigger problem for me in the OVA, where it felt like I just didn't understand. I mean, I think I understand there are practical reasons why, but narratively it felt weird that you didn't see the performance there. Here, it didn't bother me that much because it felt like the story has so much going on that I don't know if there was space for, like, here's a huge 10-minute big musical piece. But at the same time, it is the thing that feels the most different from seasons 1 and 2, is it did feel like there the music was more fully integrated into the show. That being said, I do really like the song they play, The Story of a Year, and the way that thematically is integrated into the show. But it feels like, and I suspect that it is more on the practical side, that there are certain things about doing the big, elaborate concert scenes that KyoAni in 2023 is not maybe really able to do in the same way they were in 2019 and earlier.
Yeah, and I have questions about that I think, maybe we'll get to when we talk about the rest of this. So, yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts. I will say I have a document in front of me with 11 pages of notes and 5,000 plus words. So I was noting through this whole season in part out of frustration because I know you like Kumiko. Kumiko made me tear my hair out this season, and we'll get to that. But let's just get into the history, Sean. How did this come about? Because this is the funny thing, is that we're doing this right after the movie and Sound Euphonium 2 and all that, but we're jumping way ahead in the KyoAni timeline because a lot happened in the interim.
Yes, and just a peek behind the curtains, Jonathan and I have already recorded the Violet Evergarden episodes, which will obviously come out later because that's sort of the structure of the season of the podcast. So in the Violet Evergarden episodes, we will dig into more detail of a lot of the stuff that happens around the arson attack. And that's kind of covered there. So I'm not going to go super deep into that stuff, but we'll cover it a little bit here because it's important. But yeah, so we are kind of jumping around in time a lot up to, our current period now in 2023. And even though 2019 and 2023 numerically are not very far away, in terms of our experience of the world, 2019 feels like it was 2,000 years ago. So
yes.
There's a huge gulf there. So let's get into the history. So an adaptation of Kumiko's third year in high school, which is what season 3 is, was announced on June 1st, 2019, which was just 2 months after the release of the film, Chikaino Finale, which we covered last time. And that was talked about the 5th Sound Euphonium Uji Deo Matsuri Festival, which is a live event held at the Uji Center, Uji City Cultural Center, Uji City being where this series is set. At that point, when they announced that they were adapting the third year stuff, they didn't yet make it clear exactly what form that would take. Of course, if you're looking at that in terms of the timeline, that's June 2019, while on July 18th, 2019 is when Kyoto Animation suffers the arson attack, which obviously dramatically changes the nature of kind of every single production that they have because it is such an unprecedented and horrifying tragedy. One of the people who was killed in that attack was Takimoto Yasuhiro, who obviously we have talked a lot about. He's one of the best directors KyoAni ever had, and he was working on the then recently announced second season of Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, and that second season, Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon S, Ishihara Tatsuya takes over for Takimoto on directing duties. So instead of him moving on to presumably what his next project would have been, Sound Euphonium 3, he goes and works on Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, and that series finishes airing in 2021. In this span, there's also a bunch of people here who either leave or are killed in the arson attack that are really important people for Sound Euphonium. And this is something is I think important to take note of when you're thinking about Sound Euphonium 3 and what all this stuff is. So one of the people who lost their lives is Ikeda Shoko, she was the character designer and chief animation director for the series. Ikeda Kazumi, one of the other character designers and animation directors, obviously we talked about her a lot. She was on all the key shows and stuff like that. She takes over as chief animation director and designer for the new characters when the franchise comes back. Obviously, Shoko is still credited for her work because a lot of the character designs are still her character designs. One of the other people who lost their life was Takahashi Hiroyuki, who is the musical instrument animation director. And his sort of position was taken over by Oda Minoru, who they worked together in the kind of same role on Violet Evergarden, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the Violet Evergarden podcast. But basically, Oda Minoru, same kind of position, and he kind of takes over for Takahashi Hiroyuki. Yamada Naoko, luckily was not harmed in the arson attack, but she leaves the studio. So she was series Enshutsu, or the studio co-director or whatever of the series, and she left the studio in late 2019 to go join Science Saru. So she leaves, and Ogawa Taichi, who has obviously been doing lots of work as a director for like 10 years at this point at KyoAni, he takes over her role. And then one other person who maybe is not quite as high up, but is still a really important voice as an episode director we talked about, is Fujita Haruka. She is one of the main directors on the Violet Evergarden series, but she leaves the studio sometime after the arson attack happens, sometime probably late 2019, early 2020, after the release of her Violet Evergarden Gaiden film. Obviously, there are also about 30 other animators who all of them basically had done some amount of work on Sound Euphonium, who lost their lives. And again, we'll talk about those people more in the Violet Evergarden episodes. But point being, lots of people who are really essential to Sound Euphonium lost their lives or left the studio after that arson attack, which, I think affects what Sound Euphonium, the form it takes, but then also how long it took for the season 3 to come out. News on the long-awaited continuation of Sound Euphonium finally came on June 4th, 2022, so 3 years after this was initially announced, and that was at the 6th Sound Euphonium Ujide Matsuri Festival, and that is where it was announced that they were doing the OVA, called the Ensemble Contest arc, which would release in 2023, with a special theatrical release, and then a TV season adapting the Kumiko third year arc, which would premiere in 2024. The Ensemble Contest OVA is adapted from the longest of the short stories collected in the novel The True Stories of Kitauji High School Concert Band, and that story was chosen because they wanted to flesh out more of Kumiko's second year, and it takes place immediately following the end of the film, Chikano finale, and it shows her kind of first work as the club president trying to manage this ensemble contest stuff. The idea for creating the OVA started in 2021 when KyoAni was creating a set of 5th anniversary drama CDs that was adapting a bunch of the short stories. And at that point, there were discussions about whether or not they should do the ensemble concert thing as one of the drama CD stories, but they decided it was so kind of rich and fully featured that it made more sense to hold that off and do an animated version. The Ensemble Contest OVA had a theatrical release in 74 theaters from August 4th, 2023, and it was, incredibly successful. I was hugely shocked when I looked this up and had to double-check the numbers about 5 times because of the weird translating Japanese numbers to American numbers. But it was the highest-grossing theatrical release for Sound Euphonium at 420 million yen, beating out Chikano Finale's 320 million yen by a whole 100 million. So crazy to me. I mean, I think it represents probably a lot of pent-up demand and obviously sentiment for KyoAni, but it is also not it's a really cool OVA. It's not a movie though, so it's funny to me that it is so successful. The Blu-ray release sold 6,282 copies, so the Blu-ray version sold fine, but not incredible. Although at this point we're now in 2023, so Blu-ray numbers are very different than what they have been typically because we are fully in the era of streaming at this point.
Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty good for 2023.
Yes.
One thing that's interesting, though, is that OVA, which I will just say is probably my favorite thing from this season, still has no distribution in the U.S. It's not streaming anywhere. It's not like Sentai doesn't have it. There's no Blu-ray. It's not on Crunchyroll. Thomas didn't know about it. He had seen the whole season. And then when I got back to Colorado, I said, I have to start with the Ensemble Contest arc. And he said, what's that? And he just didn't know it existed. And so we watched it together. So he saw it after the end of the series. And I feel like that's too bad because I also think, to me, it's really essential as fleshing out that second year, and we'll talk about that more, but it definitely, I think if you put this and Chikano Finale together, I probably like that movie more with this as kind of a second half or an addendum. And so if I would imagine there are listeners who haven't seen it, because it just is, you would have to go pirate it, and it's worth pirating. It's good.
Yes, and it does feel very important, even though the story itself is not world-shaking or whatever. It makes sense that it's from one of the short story collections. It does fill in important gaps for Kumiko's character, and there are lots of little things like Tsubame, who becomes a more relevant character in season 3, that her stuff is kind of established here. And yeah, so the OVA, it's cool. It's funny to me that it made so much money because I think if I went to a theater, I would have been kind of disappointed by it if I went into it thinking, oh, this is another Sound Euphonium movie. If you go into it thinking oh, this is a cool double-length OVA, it's a very fun little thing in that context.
We're going to talk about, in the Violet Evergarden episode soon, the OVA for Violet Evergarden, which is not quite double-length, but longer than an episode. It's more akin to that, I think, would be the right comparison.
Yeah, very much so. So at the premiere of the OVA is when they finally announced that the third season would begin airing in April 2024 now?
Yes, 2024.
Oh my God. What years. And it aired 13 episodes from April 7th, 2024 to June 30th, 2024, which again was very recent. The third season is an adaptation of the two-part final novel in the main series, which is Sound Euphonium, the Kitauji High School Concerts Band Decisive Final Movement, not moment, which is very similar to the second year novel is a two-part novel. This is the same kind of thing, just covering the third year. Based on what I've read, obviously I haven't read the books, I just kind of looked up what people had to say about it. It seems to be a generally faithful adaptation. Obviously it's slimmed down because it's one season covering two books. Seasons 1 and 2 each covered one book of the series, right? So you can kind of see that they have to compress things to fit it into one single season. One major change is that in the books, obviously, like there's more Shuichi stuff. So it is made explicitly clear, and it's a more major feature that Kumiko and Shuichi rekindled their romantic relationship, which was put on hold during the second year, and all that stuff happened. And generally, it just seems like Shuichi has more, like, quote unquote, screen time. That being said, one thing that's funny about the books to me is that the first thing I go to is just looking up like the plot summaries of like give me like a 4-paragraph summary of the books, and he's almost never mentioned in those. So while people say that he's very important, I'm sure that he has a lot more character stuff around the edges, it never seems like he's actually important to the main plot. And so I always am amused by people, you know, you have big Shuichi fans from the books, and I'm always like, but he never shows up in the actual plot summaries. He never seems to do anything important in the books. The big change, this is something we'll talk about, I imagine, a lot, and it seems like probably Thomas is, I'm going to guess, is going to have thoughts on this based on what you intimated earlier. In the final audition between Kumiko and Mayu, they changed the results. In the books, Kumiko won. In the show, Mayu wins. And that's, I think, a fascinating change. And I'm sure that like there are other things that are different about the books that sets that up differently. For me, watching the anime, I can't imagine Kumiko winning or like what the point of that would be narratively. But I just think it's like a very fascinating change. And when you go and look up forum discussions about it, there are a lot of very passionate thoughts about Kumiko losing that audition. I think it's very interesting. Again, we'll get into
I'm
that
with Thomas on this. I think it's a disastrous narrative decision, but we'll get there.
It's essential. It is what Kumiko.
If they knew what story they were telling, I would agree. I think there is a story that would work. It's not the story the season told, but sure.
It is 100% the story of this season, and it is where Kumiko has always been heading, and I think it's a bold and strong choice. Anyways, we'll talk about that when we get into the show. To date, we only have sales information for the first volume release. We might have, I don't know, this might actually be out of date because I made this note like a month ago at this point because it took so long to get to this podcast. But sales are looking good. Based on that, it sold 6,307 copies in its first week, making it the third best-selling volume of the season and selling only a little less than the 7,000 or 8,000 of previous seasons, which is honestly like incredibly good because home video sales have dropped dramatically over the 8 years it's been since season 2. And it has been a long time since season 2, right? And so it has held on to its Blu-ray sales really well. But also it is broadly available on streaming services, particularly in Japan. It is simulcast, or it was more or less simulcast in Crunchyroll for English-speaking audiences, and it's available on a huge, crazy, giant number of services in Japan. When I went to their website, because I was curious, if you were in Japan, where would you stream this? And I found their website. It's like a dozen services that's just available everywhere. And so, you know, it's just we are in such a different era, and we have jumped so far ahead of time that talking about Blu-ray sales now feels kind of quaint. But that's sort of the reality we're in.
Quaint, but I do think your comparison is good because, that's a very small drop for 8 years later in a time when home video sales have gone down. So, yeah, clearly it was a popular season of TV.
For sure. So let's go through the crew here a little bit. So for the Ensemble Contest arc, that OVA was directed by Ishihara Tatsuya. Again, obviously the director of the main series as well. We have assistant director Ogawa Taichi, and I find this interesting that they changed this credit. It's not series Inshutsu, which is what it was with like Yamada Naoko and, you know, various other people on other Kyoani series. It is Fuku Kantoku, which does mean assistant director. Like that is a good translation of that term. So while those two credits are technically different, based on what I've read, it seems like it is the same functional role as what Yamada Naoko did, just Ogawa Taichi is doing the same thing. Ishihara discussed in an interview that this kind of role is particularly necessary for Sound Euphonium because of the tremendous amount of work the director has with managing the instruments and musical performance and all that kind of stuff. And so needing another person to just sort of make sure, okay, does the euphonium look like it's completely fucked up in this scene, right? There's just so much technical animation, even in scenes where they're not playing the instruments, then they're just like there. There's so much work that has to do that a normal series doesn't have to do. So that's a big kind of emphasis in an interview I saw. For the OVA, the storyboards were done by Ogawa for the first half of the OVA and then Ishihara for the second half, so they kind of split duties there. Screenplay was by Hanada Juki, which is the main writer on the original series as well. Character design is just Ikeda Shoko because the OVA only has characters that were also in the movie and the TV show, so they didn't really need other new character designs, but Ikeda Kazumi took over as chief animation director. The music composer is Masuda Akido, as it was with the main series. And then, as I talked about with the musical instrument animation director, Oda Minoru takes over for Takahashi for that. And you have 2 unit directors on the OVA, Kananohara Noriyuki and Ishihara Tatsuya. For the TV show, all those positions like director, assistant director, screenplay, all that stuff is the same. Ikeda Kazumi steps in for character design for the new characters. And then, of course, you have your episode directors and storyboard artists. For episode directors, we have Ogawa Taichi directs episode 1. Ishihara Tatsuya does episodes 2 and 13. Isai Mei does episode 3, and she does the storyboards on 8. This is the first time she's come up in this podcast. Isai started as an animator at KyoAni in 2017, doing in-between animation on the Euphonium 2 compilation movie. Then she directed an episode 9 of Tsurune Season 2, which is the archery anime. And this is the first time she was credited with storyboards. And her episode 3, I think, is one of the best episodes. That's the one where Kumiko goes to Sally's shrine and has to kind of talk to her and sort of fulfill that role as the club president. I think that's a very strong, particularly debut as a storyboard artist. Yamamura Takia, who you talked about, Jonathan, a little bit earlier, did really good work on this series, and I agree. He has really stepped up in this period. He was the main director on the Tsurune seasons, so he has done a lot that we have not covered in this kind of time period. He did episodes 4, 7, and he was the director on 12, but did not do the storyboards for that one. Ishidate Taichi did episodes 5 and 9. Kitanohara Noriyuki did 6 and 11 and co-directed 10. We have a new person, Miyaki Ryo, who directed episode 8, but that was one of the ones that Isai did the storyboards on. He started doing in-between animation actually for PA work, so he did not start at KyoAni. And then he joined KyoAni sometime in the mid-2010s and started doing animation there. It's a very rare that I look at the credits for someone and see that they had credits pre-KyoAni. That has almost never happened for anyone that didn't start there in the 90s. This was their first time being an episode director. Oda Minoru did the storyboards and co-directed episode 10, and then Okamura Kohei co-directed episode 13, and he's an animation director who's been at KyoAni for a while. He worked on Myriad Colors, Phantom World, and A Silent Voice. This is the first time he was ever in an episode director role. So again, he co-directed that last episode.
I feel like it's been a while since we've seen them cultivating this much new talent in a season. Even on Violet Evergarden, there weren't, I don't think, this many new people coming in, and we're seeing the same thing where someone's doing a storyboard for someone else to direct, and then someone is directing and storyboarding their first one. Or here we have Okamura Kohei, who is doing assistance for Ishihara on the finale. That's all pretty cool. And yeah, I just do want to say with Yamamura Takia, my 2 favorite episodes of the season, by far, without contest, are his 2 episodes, 4 and 7. 4 is the one with Motomukun, and 7 is the summer episode with a focus on Mayu. I think they're just beautifully directed. I think most of the season is very monotonal to me. I think those episodes have more tonal range to it. And you can feel that this is someone who in the intervening years has directed their own show. There's shots in those episodes, like in episode 7, with Mayu reflected in Kumiko's iris, and then the reverse shot of that just, they even bring back in the half of the episode that is a clip show for the finale, because it is such a good shot.
That's episode 12 is actually where that gets brought back up.
Anyway, but yes, that episode also has clip show elements, so there we go.
It's a show about history and your life. And
okay, it's also a show about music. They could have shown that instead of the clip show, but they didn't. That's okay.
They had 2 seasons in a movie that did a lot more of that stuff.
They had 2 seasons that did a lot more of that.
The movie still had a big giant.
I think you're both right.
Thank you, Thomas. No, you only side with me. I paid you. Come on. No, I'm kidding. I didn't pay him anything.
All right, so that's our history and our crew. I think probably what makes the most sense is to start with the Ensemble Contest arc, because while it ties into the season, it is very much kind of exists as its kind of standalone OVA thing.
Yes. Here's the thing. So I think the OVA is largely, I think it's like 9/10 of the way to being really good, and then it doesn't have an ending because it doesn't have any musical performance. And I think it's a huge problem. I think it's a problem with the season 2. I think it's a problem that the season has a song, but we never hear it enough to have a relationship with it by the time it comes around at the end. But for the OVA, it feels like this is one of the most music-focused things in all of sound euphonium. It is about performing. It is about technical details. I think it does a much better job to me than the movie at showing Kumiko stepping into a leadership role. Like, I like this moment where she's teaching the breath work for Hazuki and Tsubame, and it's a lot more convincing to me in that kind of leadership thing, in part because it revolves around the drama of the music, not random interpersonal drama off to the side, that, like, I want her club president role to actually relate to the music as well, and I think this does that really well. I like the little thing they do of seeing all the ensembles at the end, everybody named out with the fun posed photos, which is a cool scene, but it does wind up feeling like it just has no ending, it has no climax, and it's slighter than I think it could be, and I think that's true of the season as well. And it just, I guess, I wonder if you have any theories on this, Sean, if it is the death of the instrument musical director, or what is it that just they don't do performance scenes this year. And I think it's a problem for a show that is about whatever else you want to say. It is about music.
Yeah, I mean, so there's no, like, interview that tells you this, because I don't think they would say it. But I think if you read between the lines, like, my analysis is I think there are two major things that happen here. You lose Takashi Hiroyuki as the musical animation instrument director, right, which is huge. But then also, you know, you lose, I mean, several of the key animators that were killed in that fire had been at KyoAni since the early 2000s or even in the 90s, right? So you lose some of your most experienced animators at the company are killed in the fire. And so I think that just makes it, from a practical point of view, incredibly difficult, I have to imagine, to do those really big, elaborate scenes. I also suspect that Yamada Naoko not working on the series also means that the music is de-emphasized. Because if you look at Yamada Naoko's career, every single thing she has done, the music has been hugely important. Obviously, she started with K-On!, which is all about, girls starting a band. Tamako Market, the music is not as central, but the record store is still like this sacred, holy place, basically, in that show. And so, like, music is put into this very kind of rarefied position in the world of Tamako Market.
I mean, music is so key to Tamako Market that there's the song that her dad wrote that is like the key to the whole series. The end of Tamako Love Story is that. I agree on this, Sean, that I think the Yamada Naoko of it all is true, and I do feel her absence here. I also feel Fujita Haruka's absence. I think there is a notable lack of female gaze in this season compared to the other stuff in Sound Euphonium. I don't want to be too gender essentialist about that, but I do think it's felt to me in certain parts, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, whatever the case, I do just think it's a show about music. I wish there was more music in it. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, this is the criticism I most feel as well, that it feels like, I also just wish that there was just like one more episode in the season of the show to make space for building in another musical performance somewhere in the middle. To build up a little bit more direct familiarity, because you hear a lot of the Song of a Year. It's actually played a lot in the show, but it's a lot of like them playing small parts of it. You hear the solo thing, or the soli, between the euphonium and the trumpet once, because Kumiko and Reina play it at the festival. You hear them like listening to the CD of it multiple times. So you do hear that song, but it would have been better to have gotten a more sustained performance of it, I think, somewhere in the middle or earlier in that season to build up a bigger familiarity with it.
Well, I think one of the things the OVA does really well that's just completely absent from season 3 is there are some rehearsal scenes. Mm-hmm. And it's cool in the OVA because it's a small ensemble. So it's a group of characters that's, a much smaller group. Kumiko gets to take on this sort of teaching position. And that's really not there anywhere in season 3. So you do hear some of it, but you don't get the sense that, like, the characters are meaningfully interacting with it on screen.
Yeah, I think, like, they're more interacting with it on a thematic level than they are on a performance level. Like, the Song of a Year has a lot of deep resonance to the narrative of the cycle of the year that they're going through and all that stuff and the seasons, and that, like, is what the song is about. And so it comes up in some key moments in that way, but you're right, you don't get as much of the how do you play this section? Like, how do you do this better? How do you do that?
I think
Yeah.
Like, even just the, like, improving musically aside, you can do the thematic stuff tied in with that, and that's something seasons 1 and 2 and this OVA did really well. That, like, they do get some of the thematic stuff, like you said, but they just, like, they do it so indirectly that, to me, it kind of loses the meaning.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the season 3. I want to focus on the OVA stuff. So, because with the OVA, I think it is the, like, I agree with you, Jonathan, that it's a huge problem for me with the OVA, because it so feels like it's building up to us seeing their performance, because it's so focused on, here's all them practicing the music is the whole, like, middle section of the OVA. And then when you get to the end, I like that they do the big montage of all the different band members and you see all their different groups together is cool, but, like, maybe you could have done that intercut more with showing their actual performance, because I think the song that is playing in the background there is supposed to be their performance, but you don't feel it because you don't see them playing it at all. And so it feels so disconnected from the, like, their experience playing the music versus what you're seeing on screen is just, here's all the pictures of all the different ensembles put together. And it feels so like a rug pull kind of at the end, that you don't actually see the thing that they have been working for throughout the whole OVA.
I will say, though, I do want to stress again, I do like it as fleshing out her second year, which is the most truncated thing in the whole show, because it's one 90-minute movie. And I think having more of that is nice. I think I look back on the OVA maybe even more positively, because I see Kumiko being a good club president here, and I think she's not very good at the job in the main season, but we can debate about that later. I like having a little bit more of Reina in here, and some more stuff getting her kind of back into the fold after she was kind of on the sidelines for season 2 in the movie. But yeah, I think without that ending, it does feel slight in a way that I think is too bad, because I think it's a very well-directed. It's got that Ishihara Tatsuya gloss to it of, like, just feeling like everything is in its proper place that we've talked about before. I don't know. What did you think about this, Thomas? Because you watched this at the end of everything. It's the last Sound Euphonium thing you watched.
Yeah. Well, I really like it as, like, to me, a prelude to season 3, kind of, even though it's supposed to be more of an extension to the movie, or, you know, an addendum maybe, but some of my favorite parts were just sort of in the beginning, when all of the club members are sort of forming their groups, and you get to see, like, they have this understanding of music and of each other, and how they get to explore that more freely, and what does that look like now for Kumiko and Reina and their group. Hazuki gets to play, which I think at that time is a really big deal, because she doesn't get a lot to do in season 3, unfortunately. Or season 2, for that matter.
But she does get into the
yes.
concert in season 3, which is maybe one of the most feel-good moments in the history of the show. Is finally seeing
huge
Hazuki
moment
make
of triumph for like 3 seconds, and then we got to get back to other stuff. That wasn't a complaint. That was just like, there's a lot going on in season 3. The other, like I mentioned earlier, the other scene I really like, and Jonathan, you were kind of talking about this, like, is Kumiko being this actually really good president on a musical level. And to me, she's actually being a really good instructor there, that she's sort of finding why it is that this percussionist is having trouble sort of locking in with everyone. And the the reason to me was very, like, simple, like actually a huge failure of Taki-sensei, that he never caught this, that she doesn't know to breathe with the whole wind band. Percussionists should learn that, like, if you start in 5th grade, you should learn that no later than 6th grade. Anyway, I know they start differently, but so to me it was this really interesting sort of prelude to season 3, that she does that. You get to see that, like, these are the things she's really good at, and she's getting better at them. And so I think it does set up that arc that, whether or not you think it was successful, season 3 is attempting to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it shows her in a space where there's not a lot else going on, right? Like, all the contests are done. They have nothing ahead of them in the year. So it is just them getting to kind of sit down and have fun with the music, and there's none of the drama, because none of the pressure exists. Although there is, for me, the most intense moment in the history of Sound Euphonium, and this is probably another, like, kind of teacher thing, but there's a scene, and it's a fantastic scene near the end, as they're heading to do the performance, where Kumiko and Tsubame are carrying the xylophones or whatever those are, and this, like, the marimba, thank you. And they're having to, you know, kind of manhandle this thing over this little lip, and then could cross and pick it up. And the whole time I'm like, don't fucking drop it. Oh my god, don't. Like, I'm just seeing the paperwork and all the fucking, shit that would have to go down as the teacher if this thing gets damaged. And they're having a very good conversation, about like how far they've come and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just sitting there being like, just don't, please. Oh my god, like, use your back, lift with your legs. Come on, good posture. Let's go. Let's not fuck this thing up.
Sean, I have to say, if thank you for mentioning that scene, because I do not mean this to damn the rest of the season with faint praise. That is probably my favorite scene of this and everything we're talking about today. And it is the lover of Someday in the Rain of me, of like, one of my favorite KyoAni scenes is Yuki Nagato just sitting in the room reading for 3 minutes straight. I like the minutia of them having to move that fucking marimba. There's something about that there's this little, Sisyphean task, and they are also talking about how they've grown together. It is also a tremendous little piece of technical animation. That is just the good, finicky KyoAni details. I love that scene.
I'm a little torn on it, because I do respect it as like it sticks out to me vividly, actually, for all the reasons you said, Jonathan. But the realist in me is just thinking, marimba's not actually that heavy. If you're just lifting it over a curb, you don't need to like jump over to the other side to help someone. It's like, if you're lifting half of it, it's like 20 pounds maybe.
Both of them, both hands on it at all times. Do not, don't fuck this up. Don't fuck this up, please. They should also be wearing helmets or something. I don't know, just to be extra safe. So I don't get sued. See, there's one other moment in the OVA that I really like. It's just like a little scene, but it really sticks out, particularly because it gets echoed in season 3. There's the moment earlier on where Kumiko, when she's still trying to find her ensemble, is practicing in her Kumiko corner. And then Mizore jump scares her from the fucking half-open window. And there's a lot of really great surprised Kumiko moments where she just, like, flips the fuck out because someone snuck up on her. This is the first one of those. And there's this whole thing of, like, Kumiko being good at opening up the window and all this stuff. And there's just, like, this little conversation between her and Mizore there that I found very meaningful. That sets up a lot of little moments in season 3. It sets up the, like... the whole kind of notion of Mizore is going off to be, this incredible musician at this music college. Kumiko is still not sure exactly what she wants to do with her life, but she's really fucking good at opening this window, which has a lot of, I think, symbolic meaning there implied in it. But then there's a moment in episode 13 on the show when Kumiko passes down sound euphonium to Kanade, where Kanade also like is really struggling to open that fucking window. She does the same jump scare as well, but she's like really struggling to open the window, and then she manages to pry it open. And it's a good way of like the OVA is both an extension of the movie kind of finale, but it is very much a lead into what the TV show season is going to be, because there are little moments like that that get set up here that have payoff in the TV show.
All right. Anything else to say about the OVA? I feel like it's good. It's not like we obviously didn't make it its own podcast for a reason.
Yes, I'm glad that because this is a rare thing where neither of us obviously had seen any of this stuff beforehand because it did not exist. So we just had to go off of, well, probably the OVA is a thing that doesn't need its own episode. And luckily, it's fun, but it is very slight, especially without that musical performance at the end.
I just think it's very good that the clarinet quartet was the winner of the Kitauji, at least their group, and they went to at least regionals, we find out. Clarinet quartets are one of the best small ensembles. I'm a clarinet player. Clarinet quartets are great. Clarinet choirs, which are like bigger groups, are terrible, so just throwing that out there.
This is the hot takes by Thomas Lack.
Indeed. All right. Sean, I guess that leaves us with the show itself.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games and everything else on all platforms.
And now, back to the show. All right, great. So it's a great TV season. I think it just tells a great story, and that's our podcast.
Who should start here? Who should? I think this is one where there's a lot of big picture things to say. So I guess, do we want to start negative and then move to positive, or start positive, Sean, and then have Thomas and I come in and rain on you?
I mean, let's start with the negatives, and then we'll have it out. Let's have it out.
Okay. So my thing with this season, and I said a little bit of it up front, is I understand, and this was also my view on the movie, which is also about the cycle of a year. I'm fine with the idea of going back and revisiting, conflicts and moments in the year that we have had before. There are other KyoAni shows that do that and do that very well, and we have talked about them. I think with Sound Euphonium, I think this show has a really big problem with stasis and change and the balance of that. Season 1, the band is beset by internecine anxieties over auditions and merit in the school year, and in Season 3, they are beset by internecine anxieties over auditions and merit and what Taki-sensei is doing. And the anxieties that seemingly tore the band apart before Kumiko got there and were present in her first year are still the conflicts going on now, and I don't think anyone ever actually figures out how to solve them, because the climax of the season is also the same as the climax of Season 1, and Taki is making the same mistakes he was making in Season 1, but they never go acknowledged. In Season 1, Taki is sort of aloof and distant from the students and not sure how to communicate with them, and that is who he is in Season 3. In Season 1, Kumiko and Reina have this heated, seemingly romantic connection that feels like it's going to go deeper, and Season 3 repeats a lot of those scenes down to, now we have Kumiko doing the, finger across the lip, but no homo. We're not doing that. Can't do that. In Season 1, Kumiko hates Shuichi and hates people assuming that they're dating, and in Season 3, she still does, and we still have the jokes about how she doesn't like Shuichi, and she doesn't like people assuming they're dating. In Season 1, they choose nationals as a vote, even though it obviously creates peer pressure, with the whole group doing that, and in Season 3 they still do, and no one acknowledges that might be problematic. Season 1 climaxes with drama over an audition and 2 potential players auditioning in front of the whole band, only for the person with fewer existing ties to the band to win, and Season 3 also climaxes with that. Season 1, Reina is madly in love with Taki-sensei and has no awareness that there might be problematic in any number of ways, and that is still who she is at the end of Season 3. And it just feels like, while there is some neat evolution in places, a lot of Sound Euphonium is the same small set of events and conflicts repeated without much in the way of variation, and I found this season very familiar. On top of that, I think Kumiko's arc is very confused, and I think goes in a lot of cycles, where if the point is Kumiko has, problems that she has to overcome, obviously, totally fine. That's what a story is. That's not my complaint. And there are parts of this season where Kumiko works for me very well. Particularly, my favorite episode of the season is the Yamuera Takia episode 7, which is the one set over the summer break. And it is kind of the one big episode where Kumiko really tries to engage with Mayu as a human being and empathize with her. And I like how she is active and how Mayu as a new character is animating things around her. And I think a lot of that is missing to me in other parts of the season. I think it is weird to me. And I guess, so I'll get to this. Obviously, the key turning point climax, the real climax of the season is episode 12, where you have the final audition, and they do it blind, and Kumiko loses, and Mayu wins, and Reina is involved in that vote and all that stuff. And Thomas and I were going back and forth on why this didn't work for us. And I wrote this in my notes, and I said it to Thomas, and he agreed with me, and I'll let him follow up on this in a second. But I'll put it this way. If you're telling a story about how Kumiko is bad at speaking her mind or standing up for herself and saying what she wants, and that ultimately costs her the duet with Reina, I think that works, and I think that is nominally what the story is going for. But I don't think you can also have, which they do, several episodes in the middle of the season where she learns to speak her mind and is running down the street in the rain, crying, screaming about how she has to speak her mind, and then does it literally 10 minutes before the Kansai competition at the last possible minute, even though Asuka had told her, you always leave things for the last minute. I feel like she should have learned a lesson there. On the flip side, I think if you want to tell a story about how Kumiko learns to stand up for herself and say what she wants and really advocate for herself and go for things, then once she learns that lesson, I think she should follow through and win the audition because of it. I have other problems with the audition thing, in part because they treat it as a solo when it is a duet, and I don't like that no one ever talks. It's not a solo. It's a duet, and I think it would matter that Kumiko and Reina have a pre-existing relationship that she does not have with Mayu, and I think you can hear that in the auditions. But I think KyoAni, in my 2 possible stories they could have told, I think they told neither, and it feels fundamentally wrong, because I don't think the ending matches the build-up, and I don't think the build-up matches the ending, And then I think it winds up with a pretty limp finale where, I'll get into this later, I have mixed feelings about it, and I don't even know if my thoughts are correct to me. But the Kumiko becomes a teacher ending both feels right and feels weirdly tragic to me in ways I can't quite. I have a bunch of writing and reflection on this, and it might just be my own issues. But that is kind of my opening salvo. Thomas, I know you and I were going back and forth in this, so I'll throw it over to you to see what thoughts you have on that.
Well, yeah, I think, thinking back on it, I guess it's only been 3 weeks since the finale, but I sort of come to the same conclusion as you, but through a different sort of set of Kumiko's problems, because, to me, the things that stick out after having watched it that I keep thinking back on are all the drama with Kumiko trying to decide what to do with her future. And to me, it felt very obvious from the beginning that she would be a successful music teacher and that she would be happy doing that, and that she's good at it and that she could continue to grow at it, and that that's destiny, kind of, the way it's set up. So, her struggling to decide on that is interesting. There are so many conversations she has with Reina, and she always comes to the conclusion that, no, I'm not doing music school. You can't be a music teacher without doing music school, though, and I think it's a big problem that they don't actually have a conversation about that, her and Reina, because Reina obviously respects Taki a lot. And so for her to never even suggest I know you're not interested in being a performer, but clearly you're a good teacher, back in that ensemble, thing we were doing last year, you really came through and you taught basically the 2 weak members how to be stronger and support people. And I think, you've been doing that not directly, but emotionally on the side this whole time. So then when it gets to the point where, I think it's earlier in the same episode 12, where she turns in her sheet, but they don't tell you what's on there. And then they have the audition later, and she justifies losing the audition to herself as, I hesitated because, I don't want to go to music school with Reina, or, like Reina, and I don't want to, and I don't know what I'm doing with my life. But at that point, I think it should be kind of a moment for triumph for Kumiko and her arc, that she's figured out what she wants to do, and it's something that she's actually well suited for. And we as the audience aren't privy to that unless, you sort of had the thought earlier. But so I think just that whole thematizing her climax in this season is really confused, and it doesn't land to me emotionally. It's this devastating moment of her losing, but I don't think she has an opportunity to learn from that, because she already did sort of the learning necessary to come to her conclusion about the future from losing the regionals, basically.
Yeah. So here's my take on why this is the ending that makes sense for the show in the story they've told with Kumiko. I feel the story they're trying to tell here is not about Kumiko learning to speak her mind, really. It's about her having to go through a really harsh trial about what it is to try to become a teacher and a club president by extension. Her huge failure in this season is not that she doesn't get the solo. Her failure in the season is that she fails to get the solo, and that causes her to fuck up as a club president. That it's so personal and it's so intense to her, and it's so close to home, everything that Mayu is as a character, that it causes her to lose sight of the bigger picture and what she really wants to be, what she really wants to do with her life. And she's stuck in this framework of, she's always aspired to Reina. Reina has always been this sort of symbol to her that she has strove for, but does she really want to be Reina? And it's and obviously the answer to that is no. Her and Reina's paths are very different, even if they might both involve music. And so her triumph, if it was just her winning the solo, she wouldn't have learned anything or achieved anything, because it's not about her winning the solo. It's about her being able to lose the solo and be able to work through that. And so her big moment of triumph and the big climax, the true climax of the season, is in episode 12, where she loses and then she turns that around immediately and uses that to inspire the club and bring them with her, which is what she should have originally done at the midpoint of the season when she lost the solo in that second round at the summer training camp. That was her huge failure. It wasn't that she messed up the solo or whatever and that Mayu was better. There will always be someone that's better than Kumiko, as there will eventually be someone that's better than Reina. There's always a bigger fish. the true trial for her is like when you encounter that, what do you do with it? When it is this emotionally high stakes for her, when it's the third year, when she's the club president, when she has worked so hard for all of this stuff, and it's her best friend is the other person playing in the duet or, whatever. Like, they don't even call it a solo. They call it a soli. I don't know what the difference is there. Maybe Thomas can inform us in a little bit. But in that relationship, it carries a lot of meaning for Kumiko, and it has a lot of emotional weight. But her true thing she needs to do is be able to look past that and go past that, because just because you're really good friends with someone doesn't mean you're going to play a good duet with them, right?
By the logic of this show through the movie Liz and the Bluebird, yes, but okay. I mean, that's
kind of.
It's a huge theme in this show, and we can talk about in the episode. I think the one that Kumiko plays with her is so much more active as a duet and an actual piece of performance. But that's the production of the show. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the point is that it's supposed to be like neck and neck. They both sound about as good as one another, which is part of where it causes stress for the club and for Taki Sensei. Because another big part of Kumiko's journey and with Taki Sensei is coming to understand that he doesn't really know what he's doing, right? He's fumbling in the dark. He's doing his best. He's not a born teacher. Like, this is not the profession.
Do you think the show is aware of that?
Yes.
I don't think the show is aware of that. I think he is an awful teacher this season, and I wish someone fucking said it, because to have the end of your show be him making the same mistakes of outsourcing his fucking adult decisions to the students again, 3 years into this thing, and I feel like there's no acknowledgement other than the little moment where he is shamed by Kumiko having the suggestion about it. Like, I need more than that. I just do, for a show that it was 39 episodes and 2 movies.
I feel like it gives you enough. I feel like you see the cracks in the armor, right? Taki Sensei, part of his issue is he is such a distant figure as a teacher, and he acknowledges that in a couple of scenes in this season. That it's the thing he struggles with is he has no good way of really maintaining a productive student-teacher relationship, and that's part of what causes this drama to fester time and time again. And that the reality is that Kumiko is so much better suited for the teaching part of it, for the building relationships with the students and dealing with them in that way. Like, her musical expertise, I don't know. But as a person, Kumiko is so much better prepared almost already than Taki Sensei is to be a teacher. And I think that is part of the thing, is he knows a lot of shit about music. But if Kumiko was not there as the club president to deal with all this shit, that club would have fallen apart, because he's not good at that part of the job. And I think that, to me, that tracks with his character and how he's been shown consistently all throughout the show, is that, he has a burning drive to want to get gold, because that's a way for him to work through the grief of losing his wife. But he did not get into teaching to be a teacher, and I think that it makes sense to me that he is the way that he is.
I agree mostly with everything you're saying, Sean. I just think the show is really bad at framing it that way.
I agree.
It's confused in what it's actually trying to do, because we all agree that this moment in episode 12 is the climax that sort of but is the culmination of Kumiko's story.
I would say it does resolve her story arc. The episode 13, even the music performance, and in some ways I think even them getting gold at Nationals is more of a denouement than it is the resolution of the show. To me, episode 12 is definitively the climax and the resolution of Kumiko's storyline.
Yes, I think we're just trying to find the right word for it, but yeah.
But the problem for me is, even if all of that stuff is there and it's in the text of the show, Kumiko's reaction to it is just wrong then. Because she doesn't say she's okay with losing to herself because of these other things she's realized. She says she understands why she lost, because she hesitated, because she's not sure about music still.
But she's frustrated at her inability to have been able to win that solo, right? That she wanted to win it through her own ability. And that is the other part of her culmination, is right. It is the direct contrast with the flashback of middle school from the very beginning of the show, is her being, in a Mayu-esque way, totally unaffected by everything that's happened. And Reina breaks down into tears saying, I'm so frustrated, I wish I could die. And that is what now Kumiko is brought to that point, right? She is now she is the Reina in that moment. She has pushed herself as far as she feels she can go. She didn't quite make it. That's going to be frustrating, and it's okay to feel the frustration and to be devastated by it. But that doesn't mean that you then fall down as the club president. It doesn't mean that you then, or as a teacher, that you fuck up your lesson or you bring that into the classroom with you. Because if you're going to be a teacher, you're going to face frustrations that are like 1,000 times what she's feeling in that moment. And you're going to feel it every single day. And it's like, you cannot let that affect the way that you perform in that role. And then you go home and then you break down in tears. But like that is part of what it is for her to become an adult, is be able to say, in this moment, I need to fulfill my role as club president. And then later, I'm going to let that wall go down and be vulnerable with my friend and do that. And that's like part to me of like her key growth and development as a character.
I think part of my problem with all this is that I'm just not convinced that it is what is best for the band. I think the show does a bad job showing that. I think Mayu is too distant a character. I think in episode 12, I'll just say I had spoiled for me that Kumiko lost. I knew that was coming. I didn't know which player was which, and I thought it was like brutally obvious. The second one, which turns out to be Kumiko, was the better of the two duets. It's the one that feels like a duet, whereas the first one feels like two talented people playing separately. And I'm confused by Reina's reaction to that. I'm confused that no one brings up the logic that Kumiko and Reina have spent 3 years playing together. They know each other. They know how each other play. And in the logic of this show, based on the full movie dedicated to this in part, it does not mean that is guaranteed that they will play better, but obviously anybody would think that that would be a relevant point if you are talking about a duet. And this is also their last performance of high school. Mayu has gotten to play it. I think another problem I have with this season is that it brings up the meritocracy idea a lot, and it keeps feeling like the show goes right up to the line of someone challenging that this is an assumption Kumiko had when she was a kid in her first year of high school, and as an adult, maybe it is time to reevaluate that, and I wish the show complicated the meritocracy idea, which I think deserves complicating at some point this season, instead of making it a series of straw man arguments that always come back to, no, it has to be the meritocracy, that's the only way to do it, when I think the logic of the two best friends who are about to graduate should get to play their duet together, and Mayu got to play it at Kansai sounds like a compromise that I think, if it's tearing the band apart this much, maybe it's worth at least having the conversation. And there's all those steps where, like, I buy what you're saying in theory, Sean. I don't feel it in the show even a little bit.
Because I feel like that I'm going to be a Reina for a second. That sounds like the logic of someone who's not going to win gold at nationals.
Reina is wrong so much in this season, and she's never called on it. She is a terrible friend to Kumiko frequently, and in the end she makes this choice. She basically gets to pick the soloist, or her duet partner. It is a duet, it's not a solo, it's a duet. And she makes this choice knowing it's not Kumiko, and the rest of the band has tied on it. So it comes across as cruel, like, especially with the two performances that just came, that, like, I don't think they're very similar, like, if you look really closely, but, like, I could see it going as just two different interpretations that are both really good. Musically, I find this whole thing just endlessly frustrating, in part because Taki should be making this decision. He should have, they had their solo auditions. He should have said, okay, to decide the duet, we know Reina's going to play it, so you're both going to audition for me as a duet, and then I'll decide, which I think maybe we already talked about that, but so
yes, Taki should in fact be doing the job he is paid to do. I agree.
Yeah. So but at the end, like, she doesn't even lose. Like, Reina just picks the other person. And that's the thing. That's one of the things that makes it frustrating for me, is if she was not even obviously, but just like, if you could make an argument that she was actually not as good in this soli, and that the band in this duet, and that the band agreed on that, that would be one thing. I think that would be a really good moment for her as this part of her journey. But it's not. Basically it's a coin toss, and she just loses that, and that's how it ends.
No, so for me, here's like with Reina's character, right? So because I think Reina is a very fascinating character, because she is this pillar, right? She's this rock. Like she has these like very, very, very intense passion ideals that she holds to come hell or high water. But at the same time, I think, to me, what the season is telling us is that the reason why she is so intense about it at this point is because of Kumiko, because of the way that Kumiko treats her and the way that Kumiko looks at her, right? Reina knows that Kumiko sees her as special, as you are like the best trumpet player. You are destined to be special. You are destined to go somewhere. Like, you have to be that. And that's the part of the dynamic of their relationship. And so in episode 12, when the decision comes to Reina to pick who is she going to vote for, you have a rare moment where you get a flashback that's not driven by Kumiko, right? Because this whole show almost entirely is told through Kumiko's POV. It's very rare that you break from that. And you almost never, or maybe never, have a like flashback kind of insight moment like that with someone that's not Kumiko, that Kumiko is not also present for and kind of receiving that flashback. Because you have a brief moment of Reina remembering Kumiko back in season 1, when they were faced with this same audition scenario of like, if you fail, I'll kill you, basically is what she says, which if you just say it like that without the context of the scene, it sounds very extreme. Obviously, they're, using very extreme language. But that's what she tells her. And so Reina in that moment is, through that memory, resolved to pick who she feels is the best player, regardless of anything else, and her choice is Mayu. Maybe we disagreed, maybe we feel that Kumiko is better. In that moment, that's who Reina picks, because she feels like ultimately that's what being true to Kumiko is to be this unchanging person, is to be this special person who is this goalpost for Kumiko to strive towards, because that is the foundation that their relationship has always held. And it almost kind of reminds me a little bit of, this is like a weird reference for the show, but Orga and Mikazuki from Iron-Blooded Orphans, that have this similar relationship of each person kind of pushes each other to be defined in this very particular way. And I think it's easy to look at Reina and see her as being a person who is self-driven to reach those ambitions. But I think what this season kind of shows us through the cracks is that it is Reina's relationship with Kumiko that pushes her to the extremes that she is in, that pushes her to make that choice to pick Mayu in episode 12.
And in that case, I think they shouldn't have won gold.
Yeah, I think that would also be an interesting ending. I kind of agree with that. I think it feels a little hollow when they win gold in this season. We can talk about that, but...
Why would that mean that they shouldn't win gold?
Because they've been really strict to this thing that, like, early on in the season, they talk about, we have to change something about our band because we sort of lucked into getting into nationals the first year. The second year, we didn't make it. And their conclusion is they have to have more auditions, which is fine, I think. But never in this whole season do they talk about the intangibles of music and, all the things that, like Jonathan said, they came up and listened to Bluebird a lot, and you see sort of through those intangibles how a performance can become like really magical in that last sort of rehearsal they have in that movie. And this movie just like never thinks about that. Or not movie. This season never really seems to engage with that idea of like there's more to music than just the strict meritocratic stuff. And yes, that stuff is very important. You have to be very competent to be good at music, but you also you have to have something to say with music. And it's like they don't even mention that. And so it seems like if this is like the decision that's driving Reina and Kumiko, and they get to the end and then they win and it's all sort of validated, then it seems untrue to sort of season 2 in the movie, and Listen to Bluebird at least.
I agree with this, and I think this is to me, this is not us judging the show on like Thomas and Mai's feelings of music from our lives. This is the show in seasons 1, 2, Liz and the Bluebird. Those intangibles of music, the ideas of group dynamics, those things matter until this season, where this is what I mean about the meritocracy thing not being challenged. If you really were just picking a group of players based on purely technical merit and you thought about nothing else once they got into the room together and played, you're going to put together a not that good band, because you have to think about chemistry. You have to think about these other things. Like Taki, the one smart thing he does is like balancing out the tuba section versus the euphoniums. And Kumiko talks to him about that. And he's saying, look, I'm just trying to find the right sound. But that never comes out to the rest of the group to say that. And I think it should. But like, that is an idea that is in this show that is an idea in the show right up until season 3 happens, and then it is not an idea anymore because they keep going back to Kumiko clinging to this meritocracy thing she was told in season 1, but I don't think has ever come to truly believe in. And I think it's something that Asuka basically tells her in episode 10 about her selfishness and her inability to make decisions of like, I don't know if you really understand this thing you are preaching. And I do feel like club chemistry and player chemistry is an idea in this show, except here at the end, where we're just so militant on this like meritocratic thing that I think a lot of other ideas weirdly go out the window, and we have to, I just think also the drama of episode 12 is so convoluted of, it's a tie, now it's you, Reina, so Reina has to choose, and we're doing it on pure technicality, even though like that's an unfair and biased choice for Reina to make in whatever way you talk about it. And this is also where like, that's the point where Taki-sensei should step in and do something, because leaving it to the one girl on stage playing trumpet, I also feel like is a recipe for absolute disaster in terms of club chemistry, in terms of is there any way for her with who she is to make the quote unquote right choice? And it's that where it's like, it's bringing up these thematic ideas that I want someone to sit down and have a conversation of like, you know, we've gone really far down this meritocratic path. Maybe there are other things to consider here. And instead of that, it's about how hard can Kumiko cling to this and put her ego aside in the end. And I think Kumiko, with also the ways we've seen her be empathetic in other scenes, I don't think her strength is just putting aside her ego. I want to see more of these other elements, and it's just not here.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of, like, I'm surprised by this because this never even really occurred to me as being an issue. Like, I never had a problem just sort of accepting the meritocratic piece. And also, like, I think part of it is that it is, like, they say that Mayu, and this is maybe part of the problem with not showing more musical performances, but the text of the show tells us that Mayu is incredibly good at producing the sound that Taki-sensei wants, and that she's very good with Reina in the Kansai competition. Now, we didn't see the full Kansai competition performance. We have a flashback to it in the episode afterwards where Kumiko is reflecting on it and her looking at the performance and being shocked at how good Mayu is at responding with Reina. Right, so the text of the show is telling us that part of Mayu's skill as a player, partially because she is this person, I think, like, who has sort of, you know, submerged their ego in some of these ways, she's very good at matching what is wanted for her because she's very incredibly good at blending into everything else around her. And that's part of her skill as a musician. Now, I'm not a music person, so I can't speak to if that's accurate to the real world of music or not. But to me, in the text of the show, as like a thematic point, it makes sense to me that like that is part of her skill as a player and a person that Kumiko is not able to ultimately overcome. She gets very close to it and she doesn't quite go over that line because it's fucking hard, because they're at such a high level of music that at a certain point you're not going to be able to beat whoever this person is, whether it's going to be Mayu or somebody else.
But here's the thing, you just said the text tells us this. I don't give a shit. Show us it. It's like rule number 1 in any screenwriting or filmmaking book you open is show, don't tell, right? And this is Kyoto Animation. They're the best in Japan at showing us things, and they don't show us it. They have characters tell us it in dialogue. I don't care. I need to feel it. I need to see it somewhere in the season. This is also a problem in episode 13 where we get the song, we have nothing to compare it to because we've never heard them play it before. We don't see them, we see a clip show, and then they win gold. That's very hollow to me. I have nothing to compare it to. It sounded nice. It didn't hit me even as much as the performance in the movie, which I notably said I thought was a weak performance scene. I have no emotional connection to it because they have done no showing of these things. And I think it's a real problem when you get to a turning point this fraught and this emotional, that like Mayu and her musicality, we don't know as much as we knew, even if you take Liz and the Bluebird out. Mizore, just in season 2 of Sound Euphonium. I don't know Mayu as a performer. It matters going into this. You know, in season 1, when we do the big Reina audition with the Senpai, we know both of their sounds going into that. We know what the solo is supposed to sound like. We hear the solo, and it's very stark to us which one is better, and that's the point. And I think there's a lot of failures along the way that lead up to this domino effect that we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess for me, because it's so centered in how they are characterized, that even if they didn't show it musically, I still felt it on this sort of character and thematic level. I mean, I agree that I wish that there was more musical performance because I think it would have been more pronounced, but it didn't prevent me from feeling the emotional reality of that situation as the show is trying to present it.
So I think there's some really interesting things in the two solos in the audition in episode 12 that actually kind of do tell some of this or show some of it in a good way, where Mayu, she goes first. It sounds to me like Reina is playing a solo and Mayu is playing accompaniment. That she is playing just right with Reina. Reina doesn't have to listen really to her and respond to her. It's all on Mayu to just respond to Reina, play under her, play with her tempo and all that. Kumiko plays her duet with Reina, and she actually challenges Reina to respond to her a little bit more. And that should make the performance stand out more if Reina was more responding to what's happening musically. So to me, that's why Kumiko should win that audition. Is it's set up in speech and now in this audition that Mayu is doing exactly what's expected of her, but she's not really pushing the music further. Whereas Kumiko might not be doing exactly what is expected, but she's elevating the music in the process. And I think it's really interesting to me that is, like, to me, I've watched that audition several times now, and it's like, it's actually really strong to me that's the feeling I get. And the show, like, whoever, told those two Euphonium players what to do when they recorded that seemed to know what they were doing, but the show doesn't really have a good reason for that to be the case.
Do you think, because, again, like, I'm not a musical expert in any stretch of the imagination, so do you think that there is an argument to be made that the Mayu version, where it's less challenging to Reina, if you're going for a specific sound from Taki-sensei's perspective, that you would rather have that rather than having something where there was more of a back and forth between the two instruments?
No, because it's a duet. It's not a solo with accompaniment. So it should be equal shares with both of them, basically. They should both be pushing and pulling each other. That should elevate the emotional response of the audience and the music, and it would if that was a full performance. And it's not that doing it the other way is bad necessarily, but like I think it's something that it's hard to describe unless you were to hear both of them in context live, which, is something I've done in like master classes and all that, is you get to do a lot of that stuff and hear differences between interpretations and ultimately sort of figure out why, even if something isn't precise, it can still be better.
Yeah. And I think, and I this was also my feeling on it watching it. Thomas can verbalize it much better than I can because he's an actual musician. And, maybe this is like a lawyer watching Law & Order and complaining that they didn't get the law right. I don't know. But I think the show also invites you to engage with it, certainly through the first couple seasons in the movie, on that level. And then I think a lot of that logic breaks down here. But again, it is also, I just going back to the meritocracy idea, it is just, there is this whole idea throughout this season, and it's been there throughout the whole show, because the whole show starts with, this is a broken band that fractured in half, and Taki-sensei is the new conductor coming in, trying to staple it back together, and all of that stuff. And so club chemistry is an idea that matters, and it is something that, like, they almost make every single mistake to tear it apart again. They're almost back to square one in this season. And I can't really pinpoint, other than Kumiko finally, giving her two big speeches in like episode 9 or 10 before the Kansai competition, and then in episode 12, what is the thing that holds them together? And I wish there was more engagement with the idea that, like, there are intangibles of chemistry that, like, the 3 years we've spent watching, and longer in the actual production of the show, watching Kumiko and Reina's relationship grow, has something to do with this. That the people, and this is a show that is about people, it's a show that multiple times goes through and names every single member of the ensemble, whether we've ever seen them before or not, that, like, the people do matter. Their technical ability is just part of it. And this is where I just think the show gets, in the kind of oops all audition drama that is season 3, a little tunnel visioned on what it's about and loses a lot of things. To be clear, it's not that I was disappointed this season because I never liked Sound Euphonium. I liked a lot in Sound Euphonium that just isn't here for me anymore.
It sounds to me like you think Kaori-senpai should have won and gotten the trumpet solo in season 1.
But, like, maybe someone should have, maybe there's a conversation to be had. Like, they lost at the end of that year. They didn't get gold. maybe there's a conversation to be had. I think in that case, Reina is so obviously better, it's not really a discussion. But if, as you yourself has said, Sean, it's a coin flip, they sound the same, maybe there's a conversation that is just not engaged with in the show, and it sometimes made me feel like I was going fucking crazy watching it.
Yeah, I guess, like, for me, it just never... I think partially because the show, I don't think, is actually questioning the idea of the meritocracy. Like, I don't think the show even is attempting to question it. I think the show accepts the idea that, like, we should get the best players and get the best conductor and listen to what he has to do and follow his advice and be able to put our ego and those other things aside to be able to come together as an ensemble. Now, I can't comment on if that would actually get you gold in nationals, but to me, that's what the show has consistently depicted as. That is the recipe for success. Like, that's how we have to go. And that Kumiko's role in the season, and the reason why they are able to win, is that she does a lot of good work early on in the first 4 episodes before the audition drama comes up, of laying the groundwork with all the first years. And you see her helping them pull through their doubts as they are running into how intense the training and how intense the practice is. And there are moments where the first years want to just drop out of the band entirely. And she goes and builds personal connections with them, specifically represented through episode 3 with Sally, to keep them in the band and to say, like, you are listened and heard, and we care about you, and we're all heading for the same place, and we can all go there together, because Kumiko's really good at building those relationships, which is the great failure that Taki has, and why you need Kumiko here performing that role is because Taki is not equipped to do it. And then where it goes astray is then when her ego comes into it, and she is not able to patch up the drama in the club once she fails the solo audition, because she's too wrapped up in it, and she can't support Mayu in those moments. She can't really support the rest of the band. She becomes incredibly indecisive. Her ability to build those relationships completely falls apart. And it's not until she goes and makes that big speech before Kansai where she is able to build that together and bring the band together as a whole, which is then, by implicitly through the action of the show, what allows them to win at Kansai, is that they have worked so fucking hard. And her speech is about how there is no way, with how hard we have worked and how much effort we have put in and all the blood, sweat, and tears, that we are not good enough to get gold. And so we're going to get gold. And that is the thing that unifies them. So that's like her strength as a character, and why she needs to go through that trial of the audition again, fail again, and not let that stop her this time, because that's what she needs to be able to do to go on to be the thing that she wants to be.
I agree that the show is not, or at least the source material. I'm not fully convinced Kyoto Animation's adaptation is like this, but I agree that at least the story as written on paper does not think the meritocracy idea has any problems with it. But I do think the show gets to a point where I feel like it's broaching it over and over and over again. And I'll give you my favorite example is in episode 10. This is an Ota Minoru storyboard. Kitanohara Noriyuki co-directed this episode, and I think it's one of the best episodes of best shots of the entire show, is when she goes and visits Asuka at Asuka's apartment. And there's this shot of Asuka, having an Oreo, and she's taken the Oreo apart, and the shot is framed where this is such a KyoAni shot. The Oreo, the bottom half is the bottom of the screen, the top is the top of the screen, and Kumiko is framed between the halves of the Oreo. And this is where you have her talking about she's trying to give again this very rehearsed speech she's given a million times about how Kitauji is meritocratic, and that's why it's important, and that's blah, 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 blah. And every time Kumiko says it over the course of the season, it feels like she believes it less. And I'm not sure that this episode is even aware of how good that shot is at instilling the sense that Kumiko doesn't actually believe what she's saying. Asuka knows Kumiko doesn't believe what she's saying, and I'm not sure anyone at Kitauji has ever seriously grappled with what that means, down to the implications of, what does it mean to be best? What is a club chemistry? Because if a speech before the Kansai competition can change the direction of their destiny, then the chemistry does matter, and the show believes that matters. What are those intangibles that are coming to bear? And I think it's so good at giving you that idea visually that, Kumiko is literally torn between something she is saying and what she is feeling. And I can get the idea that her ego is getting in the way of this. But I think for all the other reasons Thomas and I have been talking about, I also don't see an answer to the question that shot, for instance, is framing for us.
I think I interpreted what that was telling me differently, of that she says the meritocratic thing a lot because Mayu questions her on it constantly, because Mayu's seeking for an excuse not to be in the spotlight because she does not want to be in the spotlight. And Kumiko always comes back with the meritocratic thing. The problem isn't that the meritocratic thing is wrong. The problem is that Kumiko's saying it, but she doesn't really believe what she's saying because she wants that fucking solo. She wants to play with Reina, come hell or high water, whether or not she's the better player. In her heart of hearts, that's what she wants. She wants to play that so bad. And she is letting that get in the way of her belief in the meritocratic system, her belief in that what Taki-sensei picks because he is the expert who has, the vision of the whole band. She can't really support that vision because she knows that she's not going to be the person that plays. I think she has the premonition that this is probably what's going to happen the first time she meets Mayu. And she is struggling to support the values that she, I think, intellectually knows is what needs to drive the band to success, but her heart can't get behind because it's too hard for her to do it. To me, that's what that story is telling me in that moment.
Well, I agree that that's what it's telling you. I just think there needs to, just failing and accepting it. Again, this is where I just think there are complications to that idea where she is, every time she says the meritocracy thing, she is giving you the third grader version of, I've been told this, I have not experienced or believed it. And I think, again, this is where I just think they're telling two separate stories that converge in episode 12, one of which is Kumiko learning to speak for herself, and one of which is her kind of failing to be able to express herself and losing the audition, which is what she says to Reina when she fails, that I choked, I wasn't able to put myself into it. And that's where I just think that there were kind of multiple stories, and it's a little schizophrenic to me.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't have that sensation.
Well, I think, Sean, what you said is part of the story. I just think for that to be a successful story, she has to lose that audition pretty decisively.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Sure, I don't have a lot of strong opinions on the experience of that audition of who was better than the other one, because I was kind of with the audience and feeling like they both sounded very similar, slightly different takes on something, but they both sounded very good. But again, this is not my musical realm.
And forget that, yeah. Though, for Kumiko to learn this lesson, it shouldn't be you're basically as good. It should be you're not as good.
Yeah. I think there's a more stark version of this that is like the thing in season 1 where, the other soloist just isn't Reina. I forget that character's name. I'm sorry. Kaori. Kaori is a fine high school player, but she isn't more than that. And that's kind of part of what they're having to grapple with there. But this is the way it is framed is and even Taki is saying this, and because he is an ungodly coward, cannot just pick between them. If they are roughly the same, then there shouldn't be this much drama about it at all to begin with. But if it is, I like the idea so I had this spoiled for me before the season started. So I was watching the whole season kind of waiting for this to come into bear. If the idea is Kumiko has to accept that she and Reina made this promise when they made sweet love on the mountaintop at episode 8 of season 1, and then, no homo after that, that I'm going to be special like you, Reina. I'm going to follow you, all this stuff. And if the season 3 is she just isn't that person, but she has a different set of strengths, that's great. But if it's me and Mayu are almost as good as each other, but blah, 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 that's just not the same story. I don't think it's the same story.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of agree that it would make the point sort of more intense if she just full up, straight up, clearly lost. It feels to me like they're playing that for the drama of that moment of who is going to win. It's so tight, it's so close. I can see what you're saying about it sort of muddling the point a little bit by going about it the way that they did.
And here's the other thing I want to talk about with. Okay, I've been hinting around around the seams. I think we just have to have the Yuri conversation. Mm-hmm. I think we have to have it now because Sean, you've been promising me too that once we get to the end, we get to have a verdict on this, right?
Yes.
This isn't just me. And yes, there is no romance between Reina and Kumiko. Never happens in Sound Euphonium. That alone doesn't necessarily bother me. I mean, it bothers me in some degree because, again, it is just inevitably, Kyoto Animation in season 1 was telling a different story visually than the books were telling on paper, and as it continues, that is a tension that is animating the entire show. The thing is, seasons 2 and the movie kind of background it. They don't have the same kind of sexually charged scenes between them. Season 3 does bring those back in a couple of key moments, and this is where I do think not having Yamada Naoko, not having Fujita Haruka, not having some of the women who were at the top of the ranks helping direct this show feels a little off. I think it feels kind of cruel to the audience to do another callback and have the lip flick and things like that again in the penultimate episode if you're not doing that. I think there's a really charged scene in episode 2, I believe it is, where they are picking the song, and it is Reina and Kumiko on the bench discussing the piece, and they share their headphones, and there's this moment, it's so flirty and charged, where Reina leans in and has her, say the pick, say what it is. And there is this kind of going back to the whole kind of, identity discovery, explosive imagery. There's all these, shots of nature and travel and all this. Beautifully directed episode. And beautifully directed scene. And so that is all in there. And it was kind of funny. The other day I was looking at some of the Reddit threads on Sound Euphonium, because I just wanted to see what was some of the fan response to this show and this season. And there was one thread where it was talking about episode 12, and people, and to be clear, this debate that we're having on this podcast has been on the internet as well. This is a fraught thing. And there were several people making fun of, the people who want, Reina and Kumiko to be in a relationship and saying, the Yuri fans who never understood the show, blah, blah, blah. And then someone came into the comments and said, hey, actual girl here. I was in high school. I'm a straight girl. I had girlfriends, my friends who were girls. I just want to say, we never went to the top of a mountain and took off our, shoes and talked about how hot our feet were, or ran our fingers across each other's lips, or any of that. I would consider that as a girl extremely sexual, and since that's not my orientation, I wouldn't do it. This is not people reading into the show. This is the show. And I liked seeing that comment because it was in the middle of all these presumably dudes on Reddit just kind of having their face shoved in it. And I do think, the show does, overall, it's a very queerbaity thing to me. And I think it's there from the beginning to the end. And I do think it is a problem. I think it's also a problem with that down to this last season, they are continuing to shove Shuichi to the side, even as the show kind of wants to heteronormatize that. There is the indication in the epilogue that she and Shuichi are together through the brooch that she has on her folder in the final scene, which makes absolutely no sense given her entire disposition towards Shuichi, which still in this season reads to me as a gay woman who is annoyed that people read her as straight, even though that's not who she is. And that is the indication that I think has always been their characterization of Kumiko. But I think you can get around that. There are plenty of stories, anime or otherwise, where we have felt chemistry that the show does not ultimately feel like it wants to or can build up on. But I feel like I need some kind of release other than that. I think Kumiko and Reina playing their final solo together as a, symbolic kind of consummation at the end of the show could be one way to do it, but that's not what it is. Even though apparently that is what it was in the book, which is the less queer version of the story anyway, which is kind of funny. But I think the version that they do where it is still sexually charged, but there's also kind of a harshness to it. There is that final moment on the mountaintop, but I think their relationship winds up feeling kind of confused and unresolved to me. And it's just, the show does a lot of other things well. I still think it's a conversation worth having because it is not fans reading into anything in this show. It is the show writing checks that it ultimately never wanted to cash. Or at least the source material didn't, and they ultimately didn't want to deviate it from it that much. I don't know. I wonder if, Yamada Naoko had worked on this season, would it be different? Maybe. I don't know.
I don't think it would have been different. I don't think they would... It's hard for me to envision this show ever actually exploring them literally being in a romantic relationship rather than it being this very symbolic, visual, charged thing. But putting it in those literal terms, I can't see the show actually crossing that line, partially because it would just kind of become a slightly different story at that point. I do think it is still an issue. It is still something where, and it's an issue for me in it's the Shuichi-ness of it. It's the fact that, you know, there's the vague implication with the fucking hair clip or whatever, which was in like the movie. So that's not even in this season, right? Like they don't reestablish what that hair clip symbolizes. Like I would not have even like noticed it if I hadn't looked it up because I did the same thing. I was curious and looked up other people, what they were saying, and then people pointed that out. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, yes, I guess that is that hair clip. Though notably, she has a picture on her desk of her and all of her friends, and Shuichi's not in that picture. So it's even in the scene where it implies that they are in a romantic relationship, it still kind of is shitting on Shuichi in a way. And I think it would just be if there was just no implication of it there, if there was just no romantic anything ever with Shuichi, I think it would read a lot better. Because I don't need them to be in a relationship in the exact same way that like I don't need, like in Hyoka, Horiki and Chitanda to literally be dating. Like I don't need that to happen. I don't need Haruhi and Kyon to be dating in Haruhi to understand the romantically coded relationship between the two characters. Like I don't need it to cross that line for that relationship to be meaningful in the way that it's meaningful. And I think that what they do with Kumiko and Reina's relationship in the show is very meaningful. I think what they show about that thing I talked about earlier of like Reina being able to be the thing that she is, the person she is, because Kumiko is there to support her, because Kumiko is there to put her up on that pedestal, and that is the thing that like allows Reina to have the kind of strength that she has fundamentally, which is how I read the dynamic in the relationship as it's presented here. And I think that works really well, and it's very powerful. And there's also something very melancholy about the fact that these two people are ultimately walking different paths in life, which is part of the other story that's being told here, is that yes, they love each other very much. Hopefully they can maintain some kind of relationship. But even then, Reina's going to America. Kumiko is staying here. Reina's going to go be a professional musician. Kumiko is going to go be a teacher. Like they are going in two different places. And for me, that story works. Where it starts invoking more of that queer baitingness and where it just gets a little bit frustrating is the way that there is just the specter of Shuichi hanging around the edges of this show. It's a thing that I wish that they handled that dynamic of it differently.
The fact that Shuichi is nominally a major character for 3 seasons in a movie and doesn't even get an ending, doesn't have a denouement, barely shows up in the finale, is an afterthought. Like, there's no other way to describe that other than a problem. You can't devote that much time to a character and never do anything with them. You just can't. I
think it's fine issue. If he was just a supporting character, that there was never the like, oh, and then they dated and then they broke up, and that whole dynamic, and other characters being like, oh, are you in Shuichi? Are you going to date? Like, if that dynamic was not there and he was just the vice president dude and he was in the same tier of character as Tsubame and he was just Kumiko's old friend, like, I think that would be fine. It is the way that they sort of like have danced around it at various points in the show is what makes it a problem.
Because I do know when you look online, people who have read the novels versus, people who talk about this, they say all the time, Shuichi is a different character in the books. There are people who think that the, Reina relationship is very different in the show, and we'll talk about that. Like, KyoAni did have a different interpretation of some of these things, and I don't know what I want the squared circle to be at the end. I didn't feel it in this season. I think some of it works, some of it doesn't. But I think that was kind of inevitable with, because when you talk about, I completely am on board with you when you talk about the other KyoAni couples like, Orenda and Shitari in Hyoka.
Haruhi and Chitanda.
Haruhi and Chitanda, sorry.
You got some of
mangled those names. Okay. Kyaruhi and Hyon in The Melancholy of Suzuharu Miyahan. The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. But here's the thing. Those characters don't have moments as charged as Episode 8 of Sound Euphonium. They just don't. I guess there's the kiss in the climax of Haruhi, but I don't think that's even as sexualized as some of the things.
I don't know. There's some stuff in Hyoka, like the whole him being tangled in her hair in the first episode, and that shit's pretty fetishistically charged.
But that show also is open to the idea of romance there in a way that, it doesn't have the scent of the forbidden about it because it is othered in some way.
Yes.
This is, I understand this is a discussion probably for a different podcast and there's a larger discussion going on here, but I just think it's worth having. But Thomas, I don't know, where do you come down on all that?
I do think some of these problems are inevitable just given that the story doesn't stop at the end of the first year. Having to actually come up with a conclusion to some of this stuff is always going to be somewhat unsatisfying. And some of that I don't even think is a problem, because it does kind of mirror real life in a way. That doesn't necessarily make it a good story, but I do think Shuichi's characterization in season 3 is interesting. In the sort of few moments we do get of it, is that, you know, they're the three sort of executives, the officers of the band. I don't know what drum major means as an officer. Drum major is usually the conductor of a marching band. Like, it seems like she should be treasurer or something. Anyway, that they have this sort of thing where Kumiko is the president, so she's making the decisions, but Reina is just a, you know, ride or die for Taki, and Shuichi is sort of very in tune with the emotions of the band, and he actually wants to address those. And I think, like, just given how fraught Reina and Kumiko's relationship gets in a lot of these moments, it's weird that they didn't take the time to actually, not romantically necessarily, but just point out that Shuichi actually is a good guy who is, you know, reflective of Kumiko's state of mind a lot, and sort of accepting that their job in this year of school isn't just to, you know, lie to the students, to the first years, that they're not feeling what they're feeling, but they actually have to find a way to address it. And I think it's weird he doesn't play a bigger role in some of those moments, sort of with Kumiko. Again, not exactly romantically, but just as a friend or a supporter. And I kind of wonder if he gets to do more of that in the book.
Yeah,
I agree with this, Thomas. And in episode 2, I noted this in my notes, that this episode is not that episode. Episode 2 is nominally about Taki-sensei making this choice to include the 3 band leaders in the choice of the piece. And you have the whole moment where Reina gives her explanation of her choice to Kumiko, but Shuichi is effectively not in the episode. He's eliminated from the process. We never see him make his pick or think about it. In the earlier scene where the 3 of them discuss things, that scene is hilariously blocked so that he's not even in most of the shots. And if you were watching it on mute, you wouldn't know he's in the scene. It is a problem. Like, I wish either cut Shuichi out, he died in between season 2 and 3 on the way back to his home planet, do a Poochie, or make him a character. And if that has to be who he and Kumiko have a torrid love affair, that's fine. Just something. I need something, because he is this person there that I agree with Thomas. There are off-ramps for other things going on in the story that Shuichi, as he did in season 1, where he helps kind of like as a go-between, or he's there for Kumiko in certain moments, like they include less and less of him as the show goes on. And it feels odd when I think, put the romance aside, there are things he could do to help smooth things over, but it's down to the literal storyboarding, cutting him out of scenes he is otherwise in. It's a hilarious in-joke for us to talk about metatextually, but it's not good for the storytelling.
Well, it also, to me, it represents how strongly biased towards the meritocratic argument the show fundamentally is, because the dynamic of Shuichi, it's always been this. Like, Kumiko has always been torn between she's in the middle, right? Between Reina and Shuichi. Reina representing the idealistic music of, like, it is all about how good you are as a performer. It's about that drive to be the best. And it's about this sort of like artistic ideal of being the world's greatest musician. And then Shuichi is about the social relationships and the social dynamic of, we are a group of students and we're here to have fun and we're here to, like, you know, buddy up and go to the festival and all that kind of stuff. Right. And it's why he invites Kumiko to go to the festival with everybody else to have fun. Reina drags Kumiko up to the top of a fucking mountain overlooking that entire thing, where it's just the 2 of them, where they can go play music together. Right. It has always been the dynamic shared between these characters. And it's why in the movie you have Kumiko and Shuichi are in that relationship, and she ultimately decides to leave that relationship because, to her, the pursuit of the music represented by Reina is more important to her than being a normal high school girl who's dating her, like, childhood best friend and being that person. That's not the path she wants to walk. She wants to go follow this person that she thinks is special and is pursuing this bigger idea. And the show is so strongly biased in favor of Reina's vision and who Reina is and what she represents as that being the better thing, ultimately, that Kumiko still needs to find a compromise. But that compromise exists further on the Reina side of the spectrum by a lot than it does on the Shuichi side of the spectrum. And so that's where him getting sort of, you know, left along the sidelines, it it matches the vision of what the show is presenting thematically. That like he is there to be this conflicting force with Reina. He's constantly arguing with Reina. He and Reina get into a huge shouting match that the other band members start to overhear and stuff, right? Because he is trying to he's so focused on the social relationships of the band to the point of it being, potentially him questioning, like, following Taki Sensei and like diminishing the band's sort of like respect and ability to follow what he's saying, versus Reina, who's so far on the other side and she's so entrenched and we just have to follow what he's doing. We just have to strive to be the best musicians. If you just ignored all the rest of your shit and just practiced, there wouldn't be any of these problems, right? They're on these two sort of opposite sides. But it is not really Kumiko being in the middle. It's like Kumiko being a little bit to the side of Reina. And that's kind of, I think, the dynamic of how the show has always really presented that relationship.
I think it's more like Kumiko being sort of unwilling to challenge Reina sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I do wish that's something that, like, they actually had sort of capitalized on toward the end more, is that, like, at some point, like, Reina's mind is basically never changed, and that was something I brought up in the audition, and, like, just to clarify something I said earlier, I don't think meritocracy is the wrong thing to do for music. I think it has to start that way because you have to start with that. But once you get more into it, there's additional stuff on top of that you have to consider that Shuichi sort of does try to and Reina doesn't. So I just think that relationship, sort of ignoring the Yuri stuff is like there has to be a point where Reina gives a little too, and there never is.
Because this is, what you're describing, Sean, you're actually putting a finger on a big problem I have with this show, is that whatever theme the show wants to ultimately come down on, you cannot tell a story over multiple seasons of television where you are just clearly saying this is the only idea the entire time, even when you've set up a dramaturgical triad with three characters, one of whom is in the middle, pulled between two poles. And for 3 seasons, you do everything to tell us there is no challenge to this idea. This is the idea. In most stories, even if you ultimately want to come down on this is the right theme, you will, over the course of the story, challenge that theme, and you'll introduce the other side, and the character in Shuichi's position would be allowed to come in and make his argument, and the character in the middle, like Kumiko, would have to think about it and, like, really grapple with it. And I feel like this show, it is a problem symbolized by the Shuichi sidelining of it all, that no, it is just Reina's POV on this thing, the meritocracy is the right thing, blah, blah, blah. And, like, again, even if that is where it wants to come down, I just think dramaturgically, in any other show, we would find it weird if it never voiced the other side, never really got into it in that way. And I think it is a problem also with Reina that she is unchanging. She is a rock in this show. Like, I also think just dramaturgically, if you introduce a teenage girl in season 1 of your show who is madly in love with her teacher, who for many obvious reasons to the audience she cannot ever be with, and in season 3 she is still madly in love with her teacher and no one is challenging her on this, I think you've told a poor story. And the thing is, in season 2, there is a whole arc where Reina seems to get over it, where she learns about the dead wife, and she has her jealousy over the other teacher, and then she has the whole thing where she goes to the dead wife's grave, and she has the whole line to Kumiko about, sharing Taki, and, like, it feels like she's growing up. And then the end of season 2 is she makes her big love confession, but no one understands what it is, ha ha ha. And then in season 3, her big goal in life is to become good enough to be with Taki Sensei, and Kumiko laughs about it, but doesn't challenge her friend, who probably at some point needs the friend to tell her, maybe look for someone your own age, that it just wouldn't be so, like, illegal and skeevy. And that's another thing where I'm just like, this show sometimes is encased in amber in its ideas.
Well, I think, look, to me, like, Reina, that is Reina. Like, Reina is, like, and again, I think it is Kumiko is pushing her to be this person. She's pushing her to be and needs her to be this person that is this calcified ideal. She is raw ambition, even if that raw ambition, as all raw ambition, ultimately will be fruitless. So her ambition for Taki Sensei will come to nothing, because it will, like, there's no way to achieve that thing, right? It is like her crush on Taki Sensei, to me, represents her relationship to music. It is this, like, thing that she is striving for to be good enough to get to, and you will never be good enough to get there, because there is no peak. There's no way to get to that mountain, in the exact same way that she will never be able to be in a relationship with Taki Sensei. It's just never, ever going to happen. But she is going to forever be on that endless pursuit because that's what she needs to do in order to be special. It's like capital S special, in order to be the best there is. Like, she has to be driven and have that ambition, and Kumiko needs her to be that person in order for Kumiko to be the person that she is. That to me is like the dynamic of the relationship as the show has really always presented it. It's just sort of going further with it here in this third season.
But see, that you've just described as such a sad ending to me. That's tragic.
It's
That's
super melancholy and bittersweet. Like, that is the ending of the show. It is melancholy and bittersweet. Like, as you know, it's the seasons of the year. It is the cycle. It is the stacking the fucking rocks in the river Styx. It is melancholy. It is bittersweet. You do move on. You do say goodbye. Growing up means leaving some of those things behind as you're moving towards your own future, and driving towards what you are driving towards. And like, to me, that's part of what the story of the season is it is sad. Like, there is a sadness to seeing them have to leave this world and go on their paths, and what those various paths are always going to have a bittersweet melancholy side to it, whichever one you're following.
But they're not following a path. They're locked in place. It's if the idea is like Reina was completed as a person her first year of high school, and she will never change from that, down to who she has a crush on, down to how she opens up to people, and Kumiko is an enabler of that for her own reasons. That to me is like sad on a level I don't think the show is grappling with. And here's what I previewed this earlier, because I also found Kumiko's ending kind of sad. And I don't know if I fully buy this reading I'm about to give, but this is what I kind of thought and what I wrote in my notes, just trying to reflect on this, about how I felt Kumiko was also a tragic figure, because she is like fundamentally indecisive first to last on like a pathological level. She is unable to really articulate her wants all the way up from season 1 to all the way up to losing the last audition to be with Reina. She's unable to decide on or even envision a future career path. She ultimately stays exactly where she was. She never has to leave the Kitauji marching band. She is, like these other characters, like her idol Reina, frozen in amber, right where she started, doing the same thing she was good at in high school into adulthood. She and Reina made their big promise on the hill, but she could never climb the mountain with her, so Reina flew away. Asuka and all the other senpai moved on, and Kumiko stayed right where she always was, being the facilitator for other people's stories. And there's a way in which that feels right, and I think you can frame that as a positive and as something uplifting, even if it is a little melancholy. But it also feels sad to me. Like, they kept trying to push this character forward, but any development she had was just to get better at standing in place. And again, I don't know if I buy this reading that I'm giving. And it could be my own biases, because me going back and teaching at, say, our high school, Sean, Golden High School, would be my 7th layer of hell. I would fucking shoot myself. I had to do it. I had to go back to Golden once for another job a couple of years ago, where I was teaching with another company, and we had a class that we were going to do, and Golden was hosting it. I said, I don't want to do that. They put another teacher on it. That teacher dropped out. I had to last minute go do that. And it was one of the most nerve-wracking days of my life. I don't like being near places where I was as a kid. I'm back in Colorado right now while I'm in between some things. I don't like driving around my hometown. I don't like seeing spots from when I was a kid. I guess I identify more with Reina in the fly off to America and, try to make it big and do things. So maybe this is just my personal hangups, and I'm not judging anyone who is different than that. But this is where, like, even if the show is melancholic, there's like a sadness to it to me that I don't feel the show grappling with when I think it has a more positive ending.
Well, like, there's a melancholy to growing up. There's a melancholy to saying goodbye. There's a melancholy to the cycle of the year, right? I mean, it's the melancholy of Liz and the Blue Bird. Like, all of those things, there is a melancholic side to it. Like, I think that Kumiko's ending, though, is very positive to me, ultimately, because it's the melancholy of growing up, of having to move on and say goodbye. And moving on doesn't mean literally physically going to a different place. That's the child's idea of what it is to grow up, right? Like, you can grow up and mature and change as a person while still physically being exactly where you were, because she is the thing that she's discovered that she loves to do, that she has always loved to do, is making people better. That's her relationship with Reina, is to like push Reina to those heights, and to everyone.
You just said Reina doesn't get better. You said Reina. She does
get better in the sense that she is always going to be improving, but she's never going to hit the summit of the mountain, because there is no summit of the mountain. In the same way that you'll never be in the relationship with Taki Sensei, it's not the same thing as you're not improving. You're constantly
improving as a trumpet player, but I feel like Reina as a human. Is she a functional human being at the end of the show? Can she go off and have real human relationships? Can she live in the world? Like, that's the kind of thing, like, when you say improving, like, what does that mean?
Driving towards her ultimate goal of being the best. And yeah, she will encounter problems of, like, she is fucking bad at human relationships. Her only friend is Kumiko. And it's
why can't she get better? Why is that a closed off door in this view of the world?
In order for her to try to be the best. Like, that's what she feels she needs in order to drive towards that, to be that level of special.
But you just said, my idea was a child's idea. That's the theme song to Pokemon. I want to be the very best. Like, it's gibberish. Reina as a human needs something else, or else she's going to fucking die.
I mean, for me, so, you know, eventually she will probably have some of those ideas challenged, and she'll have to grow up in a different way. But in order for her to have the ambition to say, I'm going to leave all of this behind and fly to fucking America, where, as far as we know, I don't even know if she can fucking speak English, in order to work with a professional musician, in order to be professional trumpet player. Like, I don't even know if the implication is she's even really going to. I mean, probably she is also attending a music school, but there's also something about her dad's friend, right? And all that kind of stuff. And she will obviously encounter other kinds of challenges. But in order to have the ambition to just leave everything behind in order to pursue that, in order to go to those lengths, like, she needs to be willing to cut off so much stuff in order to do that. And so that, to me, is part of what Reina's path is. Now, for Kumiko, it is about her trying to improve the people that she finds around, to help them achieve their dreams. Let's just use it in that perspective, because that's the thing that Reina has always told Kumiko what her dream is to be special, is to be the best. And she has tried to help people move past their issues to achieve their goals or their dreams or their ambitions. And that's what she's done the entire time. It's what she did with Asuka. It's what she did with Mizore. It's what she did with, blanking on her name, the character from Kanade from the movie, right? And it's what she also does with Mayu here. It is what she loves to do. And one of the characters, I think in episode 3, makes the comment that Kumiko really loves talented people, because she is inspired by these people around her that are so amazing. And she wants to help them to grow, develop, and pursue what their ultimate goal is. And that's the thing that Matsumoto Sensei sees in her, and why Matsumoto Sensei is not surprised when that is the path that Kumiko ultimately wants to take, because that's what being a teacher is. And you have two really key moments to me in the show where these two adults, the two teachers we see, articulate this to Kumiko, where you have Taki Sensei talks about him before his wife died, him saying, this high school concert band stuff is fucking crazy. Every single year, you're just faced with the same problems. You are taking a band that most of the members are new every single year, and you're trying to win a competition that is only held once a year. It is like stacking stones in the river Styx, or the river Sanzu is the Japanese reference they make, and it's just going to be washed away, and then you have to start again. And the wife says they're not stones, they're people. And when they get washed away to take them to the other shore, they're not dead. They've moved on and they've grown and they've become better people. And you stay here and you say goodbye to them as you see them go on their path, while you stay right where you are and get a bunch of other people coming up, and you're going to do the same thing to try to bring them to the shore on the other side. So that's one thing that is said. And then there is Matsumoto Sensei, and when she gets the paper from Kumiko for where Kumiko wants to go, Kumiko says, man, like, you adults are so amazing, because she's just so shocked that Matsumoto was able to knew really what Kumiko wanted to do. And Matsumoto Sensei stops and looks at Kumiko and smiles and says, well, in a few years, you'll be thinking, man, these kids are so amazing. Because that's what this job is looking at these people who are so incredible. Some of them are so much more impressive than you are as a person. Like, I have met some students that to me are like, you are incredible. Like, you are this person that I can't even imagine how you are able to do the things that you do. And my job as a teacher is to help you on that path forward. And that is the thing that Kumiko is so good at, because she's so good at building those relationships and helping those people achieve what they really want to achieve and work through their problems. And that's why her becoming a teacher, it can be a melancholy thing, but it is also a really beautiful thing. And that's why that ending to me is so impactful, is because I see so much in the path along the way of every single step that Kumiko has taken, why this is like the path that she ultimately is going to go on. And it's one, and obviously I see a lot of myself reflected in it, obviously, because I'm a high school teacher. Like, just like Kumiko, like, I struggled so much with the idea of what I wanted to do with my future. I didn't immediately go into education school. And the idea of becoming a teacher is kind of is scary for some of the reasons you're saying, Jonathan, of like, am I just forever going to be stuck in high school? Am I always going to be in these places, the same kinds of places I grew up in? Like, will I never be able to achieve something outside of that? Like, it's one of the curses of being a teacher is kind of, I think, constantly being struck with some of those kinds of doubts. But at the same time, you see then the impact you have on the people around you. And that's the thing that makes it worthwhile. And to me, this story it captures so much of that dynamic, of that feeling of, I am in this place and I'm growing, I'm developing as a person, but I'm seeing the same problems and I'm struggling with the same things with new people day in, day out, year in, year out, all the time. That is what it is to be in a high school and to be a teacher. And I think that's like the experience Kumiko has here as club president, is she's like the mini teacher of this group in some ways, and why this season is able to tell that story through that lens.
Well, I'm glad to hear your perspective on that, and I think that's obviously 100% valid and very meaningful, and I can totally see where you're coming from on that. So yeah, and again, when I was saying earlier, it's like, I'm not even sure this is like a bad thing for the show. Is it just something that turns me off? I don't know. There are other things. Again, I think even in that whole explanation, I would like some room in this show for, like, if it is about helping people achieve their dreams, maybe the dream you have at 14 entering high school isn't going to be the path of your entire life, and maybe if you do that, you're not going to be functional as a person. And I think there's some things with Reina where, like, this season tiptoes up to the line of saying maybe she's wrong about things, but then ultimately she can't be, because her philosophy is the thing the show believes in. But I do think with Kumiko overall, like, I think it's the right ending. I think there's some steps along the way I don't love. Kumiko being a teacher is the obvious ending to a degree, and not obvious because it's bad, but because it feels right. I mean, Thomas, that's what you were saying earlier.
Absolutely. And I think,
for me with Reina, if I could just say, like, one thing with Reina there is, like, I think the problem with Reina is not that Reina is wrong. I don't think that she's wrong. It's that she doesn't know how to achieve the thing that she wants, because it requires other people. And that's like what Kumiko helps her with, right? Because, like, Reina's perspective on what the band needs to do really isn't wrong. Like, you have to have faith in Taki Sensei. You have to be able to put your faith in him.
He's horrible at his job.
And it's his problem.
Yourself.
Like, he's bad. If he wasn't bad, this stuff wouldn't happen. But even then, you have no choice. He's your band director. Like, you have to put faith in him. You can't, like, they're never going to, like, if they're not going to be able to get gold with him, they're sure shit not going to be able to get gold without him, right? Like, they have to put their faith in Taki Sensei.
Yeah, I think Reina almost tears the fucking band apart, because she is talking about an ideal, not something that even can exist in the world. Just can't. It just can't. There's no such thing. That's the thing. When they're talking about, there's a line she has early on, and I wrote about this in my notes because they say it so many fucking times. I think this was in episode 5 where Kumiko gives the explanation about, like, we are completely and perfectly meritocratic. And I wrote in my notes, I need that idea to be interrogated as the bullshit myth it is, because that's impossible. That cannot exist on Earth. It will not exist on Earth. And it's not something that the show at any point actually challenges as being something possible, or that, again, maybe a good band has something more complex than this 7-year-old's idea of we're a complete perfect meritocracy, which is something that just can't exist. And so, like, that's where I get to, like, if Reina had her druthers, the band would be on fire at the end of this season. And
absolutely.
It would be a smoldering wreckage.
That's why we need Kumiko.
Okay, but in that case, you can't say her ideas were completely correct. if her ideas almost led to the burning down of the band. Like,
She
Kumiko...
can't implement her ideas, right? Like, that's the problem. She's not a leader in that way, right? Like, if she's just the cog in the machine, she's fucking fine. But she can't bring all those other people and inspire them to head to the same place that she's trying to head. That's why you need Kumiko to give them that vision of here is where we're trying to go and here is why we can make it. Because really, that's all that they need. That's all that the other students need. All they need is to feel like they are heard and understood and they can see the vision that these other people have. If they can have that, all those other problems melt away because there really are no problems. It is purely a problem of perspective and attitude. And Taki Sensei is just so bad because he has not built student-teacher relationships, because he's just fucking terrible at it, that he is not able to do that. Reina, sure as shit, is not able to do it. And it's why you need Kumiko, because she can show people that idea. And that's the thing that is able to drive the band to its success.
Okay, I just think we're giving Kumiko way too much credit. She's not Superwoman. This is like, she's bad at her job at a bunch of junctures in this season.
She's bad when she has a crisis, right, in the midpoint. But early on and at the end, she's really good. It's at that midpoint where she has to struggle and be able to come through the other side, because that's the nature of her arc as a character.
And I think...
I think it is just a storytelling basic to me that if you're gonna say that the idea is fine, it's just its implementation or whatever, it needs to be challenged. You're having people walk around talking about, they might as well be saying dragons exist. It's an impossibility that I don't think is interrogated enough, especially when Reina is this figure that the show is just kind of unambiguously in favor of, and Kumiko is unambiguously in favor of. And I think there's a more satisfying version of this where they have to change and develop. And I just... There are ways in which Kumiko feels like she develops a lot over the course of this show, and the way in which it feels like she really, really doesn't. And there's a lot of that in the entire series, and it frustrates me.
There's an idea early on, like the first drama, where a lot of the first years, they think they're going to drop out. And Reina says, I'm fine with that. And Kumiko says, it's not Kitauji if we're not all there. And I thought when that happened that was going to be some kind of theme that the show was going to do for season 3.
Yeah.
And it kind of does, because Kumiko does have that mindset, but then when Reina's solution for the sort of mid-season drama after the second audition is do nothing, just let people be anxious and they'll play fine, like, obviously that's dumb and wrong. And so for her there to just not move an inch and like, actually, yeah, I should probably support Kumiko, because it'd be nice if someone was there to support Kumiko, actually, so she could support the band. And she does that finally after the audition in episode 12. So I mean, I guess like there's some growth there from my perspective, but like the whole motivation for Reina is fascinating to me, because it is still Taki Sensei for all this. It's like, I don't think she needs that anymore. I think at this point she's a mature enough person that her motivation is just her motivation. Like, and I think I maybe said something similar when we did Listen to Bluebird, but like performing musicians, people that in college major in music performance and are successful with that as a career, they have to be really selfish. That doesn't mean they have to be, like, socially inept. And I think it would have been really powerful if that sort of transformation had come through for Reina at all. And it just sort of feels like it doesn't.
Sure. I think for me, like, Reina is this character. She is almost like... because of what she is almost inherently symbolic in and of herself, which is why I think I don't have this problem so much, because she is like, yes, she is a character and a human being in the world of the show, but she also kind of, in a way, to me, feels like she is a symbol, that she is an idea because of how much she represents this thing, this like beautiful, impossible thing. Because you're right, Jonathan, like this ideal is not a thing that can actually happen. Like you can never have a true meritocracy. I mean, you obviously can't. I mean, Reina's, her one thing the show, shows us but doesn't actually call her out on is that she has a fucking, her family is rich and she's got like a whole recording studio in her house, which is like, oh, this is why you're better than everybody else. Right. But regardless, right, this ideal is not a thing that can really exist. And yet at the same time, this ideal is what these people are, one way or the other, trying to pursue as artists and musicians, is this, like, this burning need to be the best and to be better and to grow in this thing that is so, sort of shapeless and hard and like, it's like water, it slips through your fingers, this music, this thing that is intangible, and dedicating your whole life to it. There's a sort of insanity to that and an impossibility to it that Reina as a person sort of inhabits. And so that's where I think for me, it doesn't bother me too much, because Reina exists in kind of two modes to me in the show. And it never really felt off or wrong to me that she's like that.
I get it. And I think you can have symbolic characters that work in a movie, or characters leaning symbolic in a movie or one season of a show. I think for 3 seasons plus some movies that are about the passage of time, I think it irks me more. And, I'm not going to be convinced that there isn't a better version of Sound Euphonium where if Taki is bad at his job, and if Reina is someone who believes in meritocracy, and if Reina at the beginning of the story is in love with Taki, that there isn't a better version where by the end she realizes, this person I idolized is bad at what he does. And I am here not because of him, but because of my best friend Kumiko, which means that I can be wrong about things, which means my worldview has evolved over 3 seasons. And that is explicitly the opposite of the story that they tell by the end of this show. And if that works for you, I'm happy for you. It just can't work for me that way when there is a very obvious other version of the story that is about people realizing things that I would like to see, and I'm tearing my hair out at different junctions in this show that no one says it.
Yeah, for me, it just doesn't feel like that's what the show is actually trying to be about. So I think that way it just didn't bother me, because it just felt like...
It's not trying to be... But it's about time. It's about people growing. It's about people becoming adults. Like, why can't it be about that?
But it's about Kumiko, right? Like, because she is the POV character, right? That's what I'm saying about Reina, is this symbol. She is this eternal thing. She is so kind of heightened in those ways that's why for Reina, it doesn't bother me. For Kumiko, she does those things. She does grow. She does evolve. She does change. And that's why, like, for me, the Reina stuff, I think Reina is able to be Reina because that's what it is to be Reina, right? It's the way that Kumiko frames her as a person, and the way the show frames her as a person is in this kind of heightened space. And so that's why it doesn't affect, for me, the rest of the show, because she is treated differently, and she needs to be treated differently for the kind of dynamic the show is going for.
But that wasn't my read on the show until this season. I think...
But this is also how I felt about, like, the movie, right? So it's like, I think, like, at a certain point, our, like, interpretations and what we see the show doing diverged pretty dramatically.
I agree, but, like, I think if you look at season 1, I think Reina is a person who is in chrysalis and is changing, and there are things that are there that we are realizing about her, and she is, cold at the beginning towards Kumiko, and they have a meeting of the minds. Taki-sensei seems like someone who can change. We talked about a lot in our season 1 discussion that this is, while I agree Kumiko is your POV, this is far and away the biggest ensemble in any KyoAni show. Even if you don't consider all the characters we never meet who have character designs, there are just, the voice list at the end of episodes is longer than any other KyoAni show. There's a lot of characters. And I feel like season 3 has narrowed down to a point where Kumiko can change, but the world is encased in amber around her, and I don't like that. I want, when I see season 1 and I see us uncovering the mystery of Taki and him realizing things about his relationships to the students, if you told me after having seen season 1 that, and in season 3 he will make exactly the same mistakes in exactly the same way, and that'll be the end of his arc, I would go, what the fuck are you talking about? That's not the show we've been watching. I thought this was a show about people, and it's a show about a person, I guess, dealing with a lot of immovable forces in the world.
And I guess this is where for me it's like, as a person who feels like a person working against immovable forces in the world, right? Like, again, that cycle of the year, and of, like, Taki-sensei makes... They're not, like, identical mistakes. They're very similar. But
I would argue they're worse in season 3.
In some ways, yes, because he is so, if he feels so desperate to me to get gold with his first group of students, right? Like, he so desperately wants these are the last opportunity he has with the first group of students he ever had to be able to achieve the dream that his wife had, and he is lost. Like, he does not know how to do that, and he is going back on his own choices, right? This is the thing that lots of the characters remark on and notice over the course of the season, is that he is so struggling to figure out, how do we get there? And Kumiko helps him see so many things and have so many revelations in little tiny ways. I mean, the moment, I just cracked up at this because it felt so true. Like, the moment where they're going to have the competition of the in episode 12 of the two soloists for the audition, Kumiko has to go up to him and be like, I want to make sure that nobody can see who the players are if we're going to do this vote. And Taki Sensei is totally surprised by this, which should have been an obvious revelation. There are other things they probably should do, like not have them raise their hands. But the first time, he had them fucking clap to vote because he's an idiot. And it's like, and that had the exact effect you would expect, which is nobody fucking voted. And so, you know, he has gotten a little bit better, but he, as he says in that moment, like, he is so immature as a teacher. Like, he has so far to go. He is he has no fucking clue what he's doing. And that, to me, is very much Taki's story in this season, is he is struggling to figure out what is the thing he needs to do. What is the change he needs to make this time in order to get to the goal that he wants. And man, like, when you're a teacher, you are, you know, you're driving a train in the dark, and you are fucking throwing that rail out in front of the train while you're also with the other hand shoveling fucking coal in the engine while you're shouting out the back to make sure that nobody's getting themselves killed. You know, like, he is so lost in trying to figure out what are the different things he can do, and he's trying like several different ideas. And I so kind of am there with him of how hard that is and how difficult it is to see this, like, be presented with the same goal, but now you have been given all these different pieces. And so, well, how do I then arrange these pieces to get to that goal when I didn't get it the last time and I didn't get it the time beforehand? And so, like, yeah, Taki Sensei, he fucks up a lot as a teacher. I don't think he's very good as a teacher, but I think he's a good character because, to me, it's so real. It's so relatable. It is so true to, if this person existed, if this was his background and this was the situation he is in, like, yeah, I think these are the kinds of mistakes he would make.
I get all that. And again, it's just a difference between us, I guess, and that's totally fine. But I do feel like if I'm going to watch 40 episodes of TV and multiple movies, I need the change to be bigger than they raised their hands instead of clapping this time. Because what he's doing there, I think, is a cruelty to those students, and I need it to be acknowledged as such.
I don't think it's a cruelty.
I think it's a cruelty. I think we're putting these kids on display. You're ultimately then outsourcing your job to the students and then ultimately to Reina and not stepping in and helping. You know, I do think it's a cruelty. I think it's a cruelty to the whole band. I think it's a very, especially when you consider that there are so many other ways for him to handle this, including just doing his job and picking the soloist. It disturbs me in a way that I don't think the show is disturbed by, and that's fine if it works, but it just didn't for me. Thomas, tell us who's right.
So, this is going to sound like a cop-out. You are both right.
Thank you.
Sean,
Thank you.
I think, like, Taki Sensei having these ineptitudes that give Kumiko room to sort of fill in the blanks, and then I think in her future ultimately surpass him as a music instructor.
Yeah.
I just think it's tragic that then she doesn't get to surpass him in Reina's heart.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It is, you're right, it's tragic.
I also think, just going back to, like, the cruelty of the decision, I don't think it's from having the students raise their hands. I think it's from having the two soloists just standing there on stage. Like, vote and then have them come out. Don't have them watch the other students vote for them, even if it was blind. That's really cruel.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's like, you know, some of it is like how much of that is them staging it that way because it's much more visually dramatic, you know? Because what they should do, I mean, probably, I'm not a music teacher, but like in my mind, if I was presented this problem, probably I would just say, let's have like record your two auditions and then we can play those auditions and nobody knows which they are. And then I would just, here's a QR code going to a Google form. and you pick whichever one. Because I'm not going to have some fucking poor girl have to go count and be like, I think they're the same, you know? It's like, I just, like, give me a...
It's like, no, we're doing it again. No, Randy, you don't get to pick.
I do want to say, though, Sean, I wish they had done that because, you know, and I'm going to transition us here to another topic. It would have been the most beautifully drawn QR code in the history of existence. Because whatever else you want to say, and I think this season has some production issues in terms of not having music in it, or music performance, I should say. It is a gorgeous season of television. And one thing, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, you will hear in our upcoming Violet Evergarden discussions how much we talked about Ishidate Taichi and Fujita Haruka and the team on Violet Evergarden made some pretty significant breakthroughs in terms of lighting in animation, and we're going to talk about that, frankly, to an incessant and annoying amount on the Violet Evergarden episodes. But I don't know about you, Sean, I thought that all carried through here. Like, you can tell this is a team that had worked on Violet Evergarden because the lighting this season, in addition to just the general animation, is a noticeable notch above previous Sound Euphonium stuff, and it's gorgeous. I think this season looks better than anything even in the movie. Not Liz and the Bluebird, but the Our Promise, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Like, this season is ludicrously gorgeous.
Yeah, and the lighting in particular, because I think, it's clear that they had that, as you say, kind of artistic breakthrough as a studio working on Violet Evergarden, and they deploy it so strategically throughout the show because you get the most like sumptuous version of the KyoAni two people standing by the road at night and cars drive by and they're lit up by the headlights. You get that at like, I think 2 or 3 times across this season, and it's the best that's ever looked. There are multiple times in episodes where something like substantial happens and like the sun breaks through. Like the big one is at the end of episode 2, Triangle Syncopation. You kind of talked about the scene earlier, Jonathan. This is where it's Kumiko and Reina listening to the song. They're picking which one of the 3 songs they want to do. And so when they reveal that, we have both kind of blind picked the same song, the Song of a Year. The sun comes through the clouds and lights up that scene as you listen to the recording of that song for the first time. And you see it as it lights up the whole scene. And it's so gorgeous and beautiful. And then that scene has an incredible joke payoff of where early on Reina complained that, like, isn't this bench going to be super wet because it was raining earlier that day?
Yes.
And at the end of that, she just gets this expression on her face and stands up. She's like, yep, I knew it. My butt got wet. And I'm like, yep, sitting on a wet bench. That'll happen. But point being that there are so many moments throughout the show where it is using that use of light and changes in light, changes in the time of day, to really powerful dramatic effect.
They're also doing things I don't remember KyoAni doing pre-Violet Evergarden, like having digital light sources, where it's not... I mean, the primary way they do lighting is with drawing and color work and that stuff, but there are scenes also where they have the scene as drawn, and then they're doing digital light sources, like they've put a light, in the digital environment that shines on the characters and illuminates the existing drawing in other ways. And that's something that, again, I just don't remember them doing before Violet Evergarden, and I think they use it sparingly, which is smart. I don't think you want to do that too much in animation, but there are dedefinitely shots, particularly whenever anyone is around foliage or the sun is breaking through things, where they're able to add this extra dynamism, because again, KyoAni... they do digital animation in the sense of as everyone does, where you scan it into the computer and finish it that way. They are definitely not digital first in the way someone like, an UFO table can be in a lot of ways. But when they embrace these things, they do it very skillfully.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thomas, how do you think the show looked?
Good. It's
All right.
not really my area. It's fucking beautiful.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to say, Sean, while we're talking about how it looks, is also how it sounds. The music, once again, not much to say maybe about the score, because it's as good as it's ever been. I also want to say, though, I think the opening and closing theme of this season are easily, without peer, my favorite Sound Euphonium openings and closings. They're phenomenal. Ricotta by True, which is the opening, I think is not only a great song, I think it is one of the best openings Ishihara Tatsuya has storyboarded. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
For one, he has a very set style of opening that we've seen from air to now. And I think this is the first time where I feel like he's really broken with his pattern of how he storyboards an opening sequence. And it's gorgeous. And it's doing all these things with like different styles of animation. And I think it's implicitly giving you feelings of like memory, the way like Reina and Kumiko on the bench is drawn almost like, you know, with colored pencils and things like that. It's a tremendous opening. And I'm a little bummed it's not in like the last two or the first episode or a couple in the middle. It's so good.
Yes, because this is definitely a show where there's so much happening because they're having to compress 2 books into the season where you end up with more. We've cut the openings and endings out for time, which is, you know, it's fine. That's obviously going to happen sometimes. But I agree with you. These are my favorite openings and endings. Particularly, I think the opening just stands out to me as being better than the others. I like the others just fine. But Ricotta, it's a great song. We will talk about True a lot in the Violet Evergarden episodes because we have like her songs there that are incredible. It's just such a good job on this one. And then, yeah, the aesthetic of the opening where you have had this very Yamada Naoko-esque thing in Sound Euphonium in places where you have that kind of like chalkboard kind of thing of where like it's chalkboard animated almost. That kind of aesthetic where you have like the logo Sound Euphonium drawn out in chalk. I don't think it's not literally drawn out in chalk, but to look like it's drawn out in chalk, like different ways, and it just moves between them frame to frame. And it's a really cool look. Yamada Naoko did that kind of stuff on some of her other shows. And so I'm guessing that it feels like a Yamada Naoko kind of touch. Though Ishihara Tatsuya has done it in like Love Chibi and Other Delusions as well. So that maybe that was him. But their styles.
It's also just a thing that comes from experimental film forever, is how a lot of experimental film artists sign their films, is that like Stan Brakhage did this, but a lot of others do it, where on the physical film you sign your name over and over to make it when it goes through the projector, you see it kind of shuddering as though it's hand-drawn. That is, I believe, where Yamada Naoko gets that from, and you see a lot of anime artists are clearly inspired by that, because it's not just KyoAni does this. There's a lot of stuff, and it's a film school thing, definitely.
Yes. And then I feel like that's some of, they kind of transplant some of that aesthetic into this sort of like weird chalkboard world of the memories, as you say, this kind of nostalgic thing that is very, very effective. Because it also, like, that brings to mind that this show is sort of, technically it is all framed as in the past. I think that's part of what the opening is doing, because the first episode starts with the beginning of the epilogue at the end of the last episode where Kumiko comes in as a teacher. You don't see the Kumiko part of it, but you see the cherry blossom tree that they plant by the giant weird statue that has like the 1,000 doves it's letting go of. That cherry blossom tree is there at the very beginning of the episode, like fully grown, and you have that shot of Matsumoto and this other teacher there looking out the window. And then it cuts to Kumiko waking up in her bed. And so that is, I think, part of that effect of when you go back and look at the season in retrospective, it is all like framed in this almost kind of memory way, and the opening is doing that. Then you have the ending, Onshoku no Kanata, or like Beyond the Color of Sound, if you want to translate that literally, which is performed by our Kitauji Quartet, as all these endings are, and composed by Zach, as all these endings have been. This is a very good one. And I love this one, particularly the storyboarding around the camera that Mayu has, and
yes,
all that stuff, and the colors on all the different characters. Like Reina has this sort of like lilac color. I don't know exactly what that color is, but something that's kind of like light purple that is so good. It's such a good color on her character, and all of them, you know, it's just such a well done one of those sort of Yamada Naoko-esque music video style endings. It's so good.
I wrote in my notes, Sean, as it started, all caps, Sound Euphonium got a K-On ending, exclamation point times 3. Because I don't think the whole ending feels like that, but the first like 30 seconds where it's all them dancing around with their cameras, I was like, did they get Yamada Naoko back just to storyboard this? And they didn't. It's Ogama Taichi took this one as the Enshu, well, not Enshutsu anymore.
Yes. Assistant director.
Toku. Yes, as the assistant director, but he took this one and did a great job. And then it goes into something that's a little less K-On-esque, which is just the series of photos. But I love it, and I think it's something that also got an extra heft to me after episode 7, which again I think is a great, whatever issues I have, I think episode 7 is fucking rocks, and I think 4 does as well. But 7 is the one where you really get to know Mayu, and they get in on her whole, she has an old film camera, and she's a nerd who can tell you about film stocks and lenses and all that, and it's like, oh my god, this is such a vivid characterization, I like it. And then you get to the end of that episode and get the closing again, and you realize where all that camera stuff comes from, and it like kicked in again, because I honestly couldn't tell you what the visuals were for seasons 1 or 2. I don't remember the ending themes for those, but this one I think is just it's a great KyoAni ending theme.
Yeah, and it's another place where like this sort of like the memories in the frozen in time and the cyclical nature of the year, like all that stuff, like the pictures are a part of that as well, because that all comes up in episode 13 as well, where you have all the pictures over the ending credits, and then you have the picture that Mayu takes of our main 4 of the Kitauji Quartet, which then becomes the picture that Kumiko has on her desk in the faculty office. It's a great detail, and it's that little, for Mayu, it's that little other telling detail about her character that she doesn't like her picture being taken, which also matches up obviously with her not wanting really the solo. She doesn't want to be the person who stands out. She doesn't want to really be in the spotlight. She has a lot of, I think, issues around her kind of self-perception and ego that is represented so well in that camera. Just like her whole character is represented in that single idea.
Well, we've been going for a while. Are there any other specific moments, shots, things we need to bring up from Sound Euphonium 3?
No, I think we could just all agree this was a great show, one of the best, if not the best Sound Euphonium show, and we're all just in complete agreement on that, clearly as evidenced by this podcast.
Well, Sean, I want to say, I feel like I understand your point of view better, and I appreciate it, and I hope you appreciate my point of view better. I thought this was actually a very productive conversation. I feel like I got a lot out of it.
Yes. I think it's very appropriate that, like, probably the most disagreement we've had is on a thing that is a story about 2 friends having a very deep disagreement and they're getting into a huge argument about it. It feels very like we've almost done some sort of meta podcast that reflects the nature and the content of the show, and I appreciate that.
Sean, should this one end with me and you on a bridge and me telling you, Sean, you're a terrible podcast host, and then I just storm off?
You're a failure of a podcast host is what you'd have to say.
Yeah, you're a failure of a podcast.
And then you later.
I don't think you're a failure of a podcast host. I do think you've done a great job on all of this. Thomas, do you have any final thoughts on Sound Euphonium 3 or the whole Sound Euphonium experience, or just some music fun facts?
The euphonium is very similar, some people would disagree, to an instrument called the baritone.
I'm not sure if I would agree with that.
See, the euphonium is a little bigger, but they frequently would both read the same kind of sheet music. Euphonium also is the most, as a composer for concert band music sometimes, it is the worst instrument for one stupid reason, and that is because you have to have 2 separate parts for it. One of them is just the normal part that goes in the score before the tubas, and one of them is a part that's transposed to B flat, an octave and a second higher, a ninth higher, so that if you're playing trumpet and you want to switch to euphonium, you can read the same music and use the same fingerings, but that one doesn't go in the score.
This has been Fun Facts About Music with Thomas. If you want to hear more, join our Patreon at the $15 tier, where you will get 3 hours of this a month.
I have to apologize to you, Thomas, while you're giving that thing. I wasn't fully listening to you because I was thinking of, are there any other things I want to mention? There's a couple other things I want to point out as a big fan of season 3 of Sound Euphonium. I really love Kanade as a character, the second year, who was the first year in the movie where she was introduced. And that character to me is very heartbreaking. That she doesn't get to play with Kumiko at the end is so sad. But in a way that feels very meaningful to me. And at the end of episode 12, before Kumiko goes to have her big Reina moment, when Kanade stops her in tears, is like, why do you have to always pull the short end of the straw? Basically, and her being just so sad for Kumiko in a way that reflects Kumiko's relationship with Asuka Senpai when in seasons 1 and 2, but also is Yuko and Kaori Senpai from the first time we had the big competition version of a audition. Like, I just felt that was a really powerful echo of those moments, as there are so many different things in the season that echo moments from the previous shows, but with Kumiko now in the position of the third year, and her being the equivalent of the Asuka Senpai or Haruka or Kaori. The other thing I want to point out...
Oh, wait, just a second. I love Kanade. I was not sold on her completely from just the movie. I think having her in a week-to-week TV show, great character, really enjoyed her scenes. And there's a ton of other good... And honestly, because I was not so hot on Kumiko this year, there were a lot of other characters I wanted more of. I love the new first-year girls in the base section, one of whom has like the thick Kansai accent, right?
Yayoi, who has the bandana.
Yeah, I love all those characters. There's a scene, I think it's in the final episode with Mi-chan, who is the tall girl we met in the movie, who's doing impromptu haikus and just knocking it out of the fucking park. And I'm just like, oh man, I want more of these characters. I love them. There's a lot of the younger characters I really connected with this year. I thought they were very funny.
Yeah, you've got like Suzume, who you get in like the first 3 episodes in particular, because she's Tsubame's younger sister, and she's like the one who like has some of those issues, and she where she is trying to get her older sister like this different position in the marching band, not realizing no, she wants to do the baton shit because she thinks the baton shit is cool. Like leave it alone. I like the dynamic with all those characters, and those first 2 episodes where it's kind of more business as usual and Kumiko builds those relationships, I think is really good. You also get, I love all the sort of cameos of our 3rd-year characters from seasons 1 and 2. Then also our 2nd-year characters from season 1 or 2. Particularly we get, while you've got Kumiko and Reina, who are pretty gay, the gayest characters in Sound Euphonium is taken by Natsuki and Yuko, who have matching fucking hair clips. And when they go to Mizore's recital or whatever, they are Natsuki is, she's the more kind of butch one, and she's wearing a like pantsuit, and then Yuko's in this like dress, and those are the gayest characters in the history of KyoAni. Like it is like they don't literally tell you they're in a relationship, but that's where I'm like, no, they literally are. Like that's my read on that, is that they are not out, but like that is the most they have ever had an implication of that without it literally being a character saying the words like I love you to someone of the same gender. And it is hilarious to me. And just the reveal of Kumiko noticing the hairpins and being like, matching hairpins, huh? It's like, oh well, she's just trying to copy me, and it's like, yeah, we know what's going on.
Good stuff.
At the very end, in the epilogue, Kumiko says that Hazuki and Midori have found work, and I have to assume that Midori has found work as the Prime Minister of Japan.
Yes, she got job as everybody's mom, and that's where she's working now. Is just she's the mom for everybody in the world because she was the mom for everybody in the band.
It is something Thomas told me before I started this season, of just said, Midori is always right. Just watch it, and with that in mind, and you'll see. And it's true. I understand for Kumiko's character growth, she's up and down little as club president. I have to say, if Midori was club president, I don't think any of this fucking drama would have happened. They would have sailed to that gold.
You are probably right. Yeah, for sure. We already mentioned it, but I just want to say again, Hazuki getting into the competition members is a real... That was one of like the happiest moments in this whole show to me, because I just love that character. She's like probably the most minor of the 4 girls, but she is the one that I like the most. She's just got like, she's that kind of character that the animators love her because she just gets all the cool poses and expressions because she's such an energetic character. While I'm looking at my notes,
gets a lot of good stuff. You have the whole episode about Motomo-kun where we finally kind of, because his arc was very unresolved in the movie, but we finally get it about like why he doesn't use his last name, all of that stuff. It's very, very good, and I think that episode is great. And again, I wish, and I think if this had been a longer season, you would have gotten more of this. I wish we had more episodes just about other characters like that, because I find the characters so great, the ones on the edges. And then there's also later on, you have this drama about Motomo-kun confessing something to Midori, but it is all off screen, and there's something about Midori like gently in her way, but very clearly telling Kumiko, I'm not telling you about this. This isn't an issue for Kumiko to come in and save the day. And by a result of that, we in the audience never see what all of that was. I think is a great little piece of storytelling that is very well directed and laid out.
I mean, I just in general, and you might disagree with me on this in some places, but for me personally, I just think a really powerful tool in this season especially narratively is Kumiko's POV and the way that they play with that and what she does and doesn't see and what she does and doesn't know. And it maybe is part of the thing that causes sometimes characters to feel more like they are more static than they probably are internally, but she only sees them externally, right? Because that's the only thing she can see. But that's part of the thing with Taki, is like, he is so distant. He is such a hard nut to crack. You only ever see him from Kumiko's perspective, and she and all the other students are incredibly nervous around Taki, not because they think he's an asshole or he's going to hurt them, but just because he is a very cold, distant person. He's very hard to connect to. But those little, but that means that every little time the armor comes down and Kumiko's able to see something, it feels so powerful. And it's the same thing with Matsumoto Sensei. You know, the couple of times you see her in this show, there's a lot. This show gives you as the audience member a lot of space to be able to draw a lot of conclusions about these people that is different than just what Kumiko is seeing, but we're only seeing them through her eyes. And so we can come to conclusions that are different than her, but they are still distant from her POV. And I just think that's a really powerful tool. That's probably one of the most striking moments of it in the show, is that we never see that moment. We don't know what conversation had between Midori and Motomu. We don't know what the result of that is, and that's left to our imagination, and the show cuts us off from that. And there are other moments like that. It's why that one little moment in the audition where you see that brief moment where Reina flashes back to Kumiko telling her in the audition in season 1, hey, if you if you bend from your sort of ideals, I will kill you. Why that moment carries a lot of weight to me is because it's such a rare moment in what the season tells us. So yeah, that stuff is very, very good. Couple other little notes. I do love you meet Reina's mom in this little moment where you go to Reina's house. Again, we find out that she's a rich girl. We get it reconfirmed. I had kind of forgotten. Right. We sort of learned that in season 1, but we hadn't addressed it in a while. And the fact that she just has a fucking recording studio in her house is the most Reina thing in the world, and it's hilarious. But the funniest thing to me is she only has 2 or 3 lines of dialogue, but they did get Kikuko Inoue to play Reina's mom, who's the actress I've talked about, who is the mom in every single anime, going back to, we talked about her a lot in Clannad, because she's Nagisa's mom in Clannad. And she's been in maybe 5 or 6 different KyoAni things at this point. And I could not stop cackling when her mom shows up on screen and opens her mouth and Kikuko Inoue's voice comes out. I'm like, yeah, you have a new mom in the show? Of course. They had the only other mom we've really seen much of. We get a little bit of Kumiko's mom, but we had Asuka's mom, and that's not a Kikuko Inoue mom. That's a mean mom. So you have to have it. She plays nice moms, so.
Sean, We've joked a lot about different actors KyoAni has on speed dial. If there's one actor KyoAni has on speed dial, it is Kikuko Inoue. Because you said 6 or 7, that's got to be lowballing it. It's got to be more than that.
It's most of them.
Yeah, so I agree. It's just at the very end, right at the 1 yard line, we're getting Kikuko Inoue in Sound Euphonium also. We almost didn't do it, but here we go.
Yeah, it's we have a scene with a character's mom. Who should we get? What do you mean, who should we get? press 1 on your fucking cell phone and let's go.
Yes. Hit the big red button in the middle of the studio and she is summoned. Anyway, yeah. All right. Is that it for Sound Euphonium? Not just 3, but the whole thing?
Yeah, again, I know that you guys didn't like the season all that much, but I was hit with a powerful melancholy when the show ended, because I love it so much. It is, and I definitely recognize that I think there are things about it that are easy for me to overlook that are flaws, because I do think it's, and we'll have a conversation at a certain point at the end of all this stuff of where we rank all these shows and stuff. And I definitely think it is more flawed than something like a K-On! Or a Clannad or something for me, they're truly top tier shows. But I do really want to stress that for me personally, I have never seen an anime or really any story that engages with school and the reality of high school and on this thematic level of what it feels like, and exploring that dynamic of the changing world of where you're in the same place but you're getting older, and that both that student experience is true, but it's true if you're a teacher as well. And I think it captures a certain je ne sais quoi that was a thing that I didn't even realize that high school stories missed out on until I watched Sound Euphonium. And it's really remarkable to me because this was a show that, I always assumed was probably good, but, this is one of the few Q&A things I had not watched before we did this season because I'm not a big music person, particularly not concert band music. So I just, it didn't sort of grab my attention to go watch an anime about that. And I'm very, very glad that we did this show. or we did this podcast season and forced me to cover the show, because it's just so different than what I imagined it would be. And for me personally, it's so much better than I thought the show really was going to be, and it speaks to something very unique. And so even if you didn't like it, maybe watch the movie again in season 3 again, and maybe some of the things I've said will resonate with people, or maybe you'll see a different side of what the show's doing, because there are so many fascinating ideas about what it is to be in a school, and what that means. And this show it has made me think about a lot of stuff in my own life in a way that I thought was very cool.
Well, and I'm glad about that, and it certainly, worked for me in a lot of places, even if maybe not this season. And more than anything, I'm glad we did it for the podcast, because I thought it led to a lot of good and interesting conversations, including allowing us to bring Thomas on, because this is his domain, and I'm glad. Thank you for being here, Thomas.
Well, thank you. And just to echo Sean's comments, sort of on the opposite side, seasons 1 and 2 of this show made me feel a lot like what you were describing, Sean, that like it was something personal that the show really understood, that really resonated with me. And sadly, season 3, there is a shit ton of stuff I like about season 3, to be clear, but it just sort of, to me, it dropped the ball in my sort of personal realm.
All right. Well, on that note, Sean, what are we talking about next time?
All right, next time on Japanimation Station, and I know for sure we'll be talking about this, because for me and Jonathan, we've already talked about it a while ago, back before times, before somebody sneezed and the entire Texas power grid just had a catastrophic fucking failure. So we are going to next time be returning, as you've put in my notes here, Jonathan, on Sunday, August 4th. For the 7th and final part of our Kyoto Vacation, we will be doing Through Rain or Shine, The Life and Times of Violet Evergarden, where we'll be covering the Violet Evergarden series, including the TV show for the first episode. We'll be doing the first Violet Evergarden movie called Violet Evergarden Gaiden, Eternity of the Auto Memory Doll, for the second episode. And then we'll be doing the second Violet Evergarden movie, Violet Evergarden the Movie, for our third episode, and that will be all the Violet Evergarden stuff. And then we will be doing a little bit of extra where we'll have another episode covering Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, and then we'll also have a wrap-up episode after that. So we are in sight. We are seeing the end of this Kyoto Vacation, Jonathan. It is not too far now, and it is exciting, it is terrifying, and you will get it next time on Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation.
"あなたは未来が叶うことだけを保証する」